The Magic of the Mind. An exposition of the Kālakārāma Sutta by Bhikkhu Kaṭukurunde Ñāṇananda. Originally published by the Buddhist Publication Society in Kandy, Sri Lanka in 1974. The present revised edition is strictly for free distribution as a gift of Dhamma. The PDF version of it is available for free download at www.seeingthroughthenet.net. Published by Vortical Dharma Grantha Dharmashravana Madhya Bharaya, Sri Lanka, 2014. It is being narrated by Bhikkhu Candana. The Magic of the Mind. This book presents an exposition of the Kālakārāma Sutta, a canonical discourse with a hallowed tradition which has fallen into neglect at present. The terse discourse of the Buddha is given in an annotated translation prologued by a humorously conceived parable of a magic show. A detailed and penetrative exposition of the discourse draws out the psychological and philosophical implications of the text. As the title indicates, the main theme is the illusory nature of consciousness. The exposition centers on a discussion of the law of dependent arising, paticcasamuppada, as a golden mean which freely transcends the dualities of existence and non-existence, and mind and matter. As in the author's earlier work, Concept and Reality in Early Buddhist Thought, here too the nature of concepts forms an important subject. Observations on the relation between word and meaning are likely to be of relevance to linguistics and semantic philosophy. An attempt is also made to reconcile the negative and positive definitions of Nibbāna, the summum bonum which holds the prospect of inward peace through the stilling of all mental formations. About the publishers. Vortical Dharma Grantha Dharmashravana Madhya Bharaya, or acronymed PDDMB. It is the express wish of Venerable Bhikkhu Kaṭukurunde Ñāṇananda of Vortical Aranyaya Kandagedara Devalagamma that all his Dhamma books and recorded sermons be offered as a pure gift of Dhamma, free of charge to the Dhamma-thirsty world. Sabbadānaṃ Dhammadānaṃ Jināti. The gift of Dhamma excels all other gifts. Preface. The Magic of the Mind was written by me during the early phase of my monk's life at Island Hermitage, Dodandua. It was first published by the Buddhist Publication Society, Kandy, in 1974, at the request of the late Venerable Ñāṇaponika Mahathera of revered memory, who even took the trouble to compile an index for the book. Over the years, it has gone through several reprints and has been translated into Yugoslavian, Serbo-Croatian, German, and Korean languages. A Sinhala translation is also in preparation. I am glad that the DGMB has now decided to include this book also in their list of Dhammadānaṃ publications, and that the DSMB is making it available to the world through the Internet. I wish to record my appreciation of the help and encouragement given by the following in bringing out this Dhammadānaṃ edition. to Mr. G.T. Bandara for persistently inviting me to take this step, to Dr. G.W.N. Jayasiri and Mr. Zoimbu Sudesh for ably resetting the type for the new edition, to Mr. C. Jayasoma and his staff of the Quality Printers for their share in the quality of this Dhamma gift, and last but not least, to all those generous supporters who pool in their resources into this ford of nectar, that the Dhamma-thirsty world may drink deep of the ambrosial Dhamma free of charge. Nibbānaṃ paramang sukhang. Nibbāna is bliss supreme. Signed, Bhikkhu Kaṭukurunde Ñāṇananda. Potkulkala Aranya, Pahankanuwa, Kandagedara, Devalagamma, Sri Lanka. February 15, 2007. Buddhist era, 2550. Contents. Introduction. List of abbreviations. 1. The Magic Show, a Prologue. 2. Kālakārāma Sutta. 3. Sign and Significance in Sense Perception. 4. Dependent Arising, a Via Media. 5. The Vortical Interplay, Consciousness versus Name and Form. 6. Self, the Point of View. 7. The Transcendental Path. 8. Suchness and the Such-like One. 9. Essence of Concepts. 10. Non-Manifestative Consciousness. 11. Peace is Bliss in Nibbāna. An Epilogue. Etadattha bhikkhave katha, etadattha mantana, etadattha upanisa, etadatthaṃ sotavādhānaṃ, yadidang anupada chittassa vimukho. Conversation, monks, is for this purpose. Consultation is for this purpose. Reliance is for this purpose. Lending an ear is for this purpose, that is to say, for the clinging free deliverance of the mind. From the Anguttara Nikāya. Introduction. Kālakārāma Sutta. Historical background. The Kālakārāma Sutta, Anguttara Nikāya, Book of the Four, Sutta number 24, was preached by the Buddha to the monks while he was staying at the Kālaka monastery in Saketa. Apart from mentioning of the venue, the discourse, as it is recorded in the Anguttara Nikāya, is not placed in any significant context to show us how it was inspired. The commentary to the Anguttara Nikāya, or the numerical discourses, finds for it a setting in the aftermath of the conversion of the millionaire Kālaka, who is supposed to have constructed the monastery. According to it, the discourse was a sequel to the widespread acclamation of the Buddha's marvelous qualities. Be that as it may, the discourse, as a matter of fact, does contain some marvelous aspects of the Tathagata's transcendental wisdom. That the impact of the discourse was actually astounding is symbolically expressed by the commentarial assertion that the earth trembled at 5 points in this sermon, at the conclusion of which 500 monks attained arahantship. The sutta gains a high degree of historical importance owing to the tradition handed down by the commentaries and chronicles, that it was preached by the Venerable Mahārakkhita to convert the country of the Yonakas during the great missionary movement, which took place in the reign of the Emperor Ashoka. If the identification of the Yonakas with Greeks is correct, The choice of this deeply philosophical discourse for such a significant occasion could not have been a mere coincidence. It might have been prompted by the consideration that the philosophically mature minds of the Greeks at the time would be able to receive it well. Tradition has it that the impact of the discourse on the Yonakas was considerable, for 37,000 people attained to the fruits of the path on hearing it. The Buddhists of ancient Ceylon, or modern-day Sri Lanka, too, seem to have recognized the value of Kālakārāma Sutta as a theme capable of mustering the essence of Dhamma for a lengthy sermon. One memorable occasion on which it formed the subject of an all-night sermon was when the Arahant Kāla, or Black, Buddharakkhita preached it in the dark night of the new moon day of the dark fortnight under a black timbaru tree at Chettiyapabbata. The coincidence of darkness, or Kāla, in the names of the sutta and the preacher, as well as in the environment, probably accounts for the memorability of the occasion. The presence of King Tissa, probably Suddha Tissa, in the audience may also have contributed its share of dignity to the occasion. Significance of the Sutta. In spite of its hallowed tradition, today, at any rate, the Kālakārāma Sutta can hardly be regarded as popular. It rarely comes up as a subject of a sermon, and allusions to it in serious expositions of the Dhamma are equally rare. This, however, is no index to its degree of relevance to modern times. The darkness of near obscurity in which the sutta finds itself today is probably due to its terseness and its resemblance to the unfamiliar tetralemma. To the superficial reader, the sutta presents a mosaic of dry phrases and a set of statements that go against the grain. But beneath that dryness and the strangeness in formulation, there lie vast resources for a perennial philosophy. The sutta brings out some striking features of the epistemology of early Buddhism, the implications of which would go a long way in clearing up the muddle that exists in the fields of philosophical and psychological research, even in this modern age. Mode of presentation. In order to prepare the mind of the reader for a proper appreciation of the Kālakārāma Sutta, Chapter 1 will treat him to a magic show, which will serve as a prologue to the exposition attempted in the present work. The magic show, however, is by no means a profane element here, since it is merely an amplification of a canonical prototype attributed to the Buddha himself. Beginning with the canonical simile proper, the prologue will expand into a kind of parable which, though a trifle modern in its flavor, is designed to lubricate the reader's mind in view of the dry discourse that will follow. In a limited sense, it will also serve as a framework for discussion. Chapter 2 will present the translation of the sutta, followed by a few explanatory notes, some of which are from Venerable Buddhaghosa's commentary to the sutta. The purpose of these notes is to see that some sense emerges out of the text as it stands, with many variant readings. A deeper appreciation of the actual contents of the sutta will, however, be reserved for the subsequent chapters. The simile and the parable given in Chapter 1 will make an attempt to prove their worth in the 9 chapters that follow, the last of which forms the Epilogue. The illusory nature of consciousness will be discussed in the contexts of the doctrinal categories known as khandas, aggregates, ayatana, spheres, dhatu, elements, and paticcasamuppada, dependent arising. These chapters will regularly draw upon the well-preached Dhamma word, Dhamma padang sudesitang, scattered throughout the suttas, putting them together as far as possible into a garland of flowers. All along, similes and analogies, both canonical and modern, will illustrate the relevant facts. For even with the help of a simile, some intelligent men here comprehend the meaning of what is said. Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda, Island Hermitage, Dodandua, Sri Lanka, October of 1972. Chapter 1. The Magic Show, a Prologue. Suppose, monks, a magician or a magician's apprentice should hold a magic show at the 4 crossroads, and a keen-sighted man should see it, ponder over it, and reflect on it radically. Even as he sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically, he would find it empty. He would find it hollow. He would find it void of essence. What essence, monks, could there be in a magic show? Even so, monks, whatever consciousness, be it past, future, or present, in oneself or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a monk sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically. And even as he sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically, he would find it empty. He would find it hollow. He would find it void of essence. What essence, monks, could there be in a consciousness? Form is like a mass of foam, and feeling but an airy bubble. Perception is like a mirage, and formations a plantain tree. Consciousness is a magic show, a juggler's trick entire. All these similes were made known by the kinsman of the sun. Sangyutta Nikaya. The famous magician, whose miraculous performances you have thoroughly enjoyed on many an occasion, is back again in your town. The news of his arrival has spread far and wide, and eager crowds are now making for the large hall where he is due to perform today. You too buy a ticket and manage to enter the hall. There is already a scramble for seats, but you are not keen on securing one, for you have entered with a different purpose in mind. You have had a bright idea to outwit the magician, to play a trick on him yourself. So, you cut your way through the thronging crowds and stealthily creep into some concealed corner of the stage. The magician enters the stage through the dark curtains, clad in his pitchy black suit. Black boxes containing his secret stock in trade are also now on the stage. The performance starts, and from your point of vantage you watch. And as you watch with sharp eyes every movement of the magician, you now begin to discover, one after the other, the secrets behind those breathtaking miracles of your favorite magician. The hidden holes and false buttons in his magic boxes, the counterfeits and secret pockets, the hidden strings and buttons that are pulled and pressed under the cover of the frantic waving of his magic wand. Very soon you see through his bag of wily tricks so well that you are able to discover his next surprise well in advance. Since you can now anticipate his surprises, they now no longer surprise you. His tricks no longer deceive you. His magic has lost its magic for you. It no longer kindles your imagination as it used to do in the past. The magician's hocus-pocus and abracadabra and his magic wand now suggest nothing to you, for you know them now for what they are, that is, meaningless. The whole affair has now turned out to be an empty show, one vast hoax, a treachery. In utter disgust, you turn away from it to take a peep at the audience below, and what a sight! A sea of craned necks, eyes that gaze in blind admiration, mouths that gape in dumb appreciation, the ahs and ohs and whistles of speechless amazement. Truly, a strange admixture of tragedy and comedy which you could have enjoyed instead of the magic show, if not for the fact that you yourself were in that same sorry plight on many a previous occasion. Moved by compassion for this frenzied crowd, you almost frown on the magician as he chuckles with a sinister grin at every applause from his admirers. How is it, you wonder, that I have been deceived so long by this crook of a magician? You are fed up with all this and swear to yourself, never will I waste my time and money on such empty shows, never. The show ends. Crowds are now making for the exit. You too slip out of your hiding place unseen and mingle with them. Once outside, you spot a friend of yours, whom you know as a keen admirer of this magician. Not wishing to embarrass him with news of your unusual experience, you try to avoid him, but you are too late. Soon you find yourself listening to a vivid commentary on the magic performance. Your friend is now reliving those moments of the bliss of ignorance which he had just been enjoying. But before long he discovers that you are mild and reserved today, and wonders how you could be so, after such a marvelous show. Why, you were in the same hall all this time, weren't you? Yes, I was. Then were you sleeping? Oh, no. You weren't watching closely, I suppose. No, I was watching it all right. Maybe I was watching too closely. You say you were watching, but you don't seem to have seen the show. No, I saw it. In fact, I saw it so well that I missed the show. Chapter 2. Kālakārāma Sutta. At one time, the Exalted One was staying at Saketa in Kālakārāma's monastery. There, the Exalted One addressed the monks, saying, "Monks." "Revered sir," replied those monks in assent. The Exalted One said, "Monks, whatsoever in the world, with its gods, maras and brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses and Brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, attained, sought after, and pondered over by the mind, all that do I know. Monks, whatsoever in the world of gods and men, whatsoever is seen by the mind, that have I fully understood, all that is known to the Tathagata, but the Tathagata has not taken his stand upon it. If I were to say, monks, whatsoever in the world of gods and men, whatsoever is seen by the mind all that I do not know, it would be a falsehood in me. If I were to say, I both know it and know it not, that too would be a falsehood in me. If I were to say, I neither know it nor am ignorant of it, it would be a fault in me. Thus, monks, a Tathagata does not conceive of a visible thing as apart from sight. He does not conceive of an unseen. He does not conceive of a thing worth seeing. He does not conceive about a seer. He does not conceive of an audible thing as apart from hearing. He does not conceive of an unheard. He does not conceive of a thing worth hearing. He does not conceive about a hearer. He does not conceive of a thing to be sensed as apart from sensation. He does not conceive of an unsensed. He does not conceive of a thing worth sensing. He does not conceive about one who senses. He does not conceive of a cognizable thing as apart from cognition. He does not conceive of an uncognized. He does not conceive of a thing worth cognizing. He does not conceive about one who cognizes. Thus, monks, the Tathagata, being such like in regard to all phenomena seen, heard, sensed, and cognized, is such. Moreover, than he who is such, there is none other greater or more excellent, I declare. Whatever is seen, heard, sensed, or clung to, is esteemed as truth by other folk. Midst those who are entrenched in their own views, being such, I hold none as true or false. This barb I beheld, well in advance, whereon mankind is hooked, impaled. I know, I see, 'tis verily so. No such clinging for the Tathagatas. Chapter 3. Sign and Significance in Sense Perception. A clue to the difficulties experienced by the Buddha in coming to terms with the world may be found in your own unusual experience at the magic show. To all intents and purposes, you saw the magic performance. Yet, as your friend has proved to you, there are difficulties involved in any unreserved affirmation or denial. The position of a Tathagata who has fully comprehended the magical illusion that is consciousness is somewhat similar. He too has seen all the magical performances in the form of sense data enacted on the stage of consciousness. And yet he is aware of the limitations in any categorical affirmation or negation. Whereas the worldling is wont to take his stand upon the knowledge he has grasped, the Tathagata regards that tendency as a barb in spite of, or because of, the fact that he has fully understood. In other words, he has seen the magic show so well as to miss the show from the worldling's standpoint. The question of seeing what is shown brings us to the relationship between sign and significance. Sense perception at all levels relies largely on signs. This statement might even appear as a truism, since the Pali word sanya denotes perception as well as sign, symbol, mark, or token. It is due to the processes of grasping and recognition implicit in sense perception that the sign has come to play such an important part in it. Grasping, be it physical or mental, can at best be merely a symbolical affair. The actual point of contact is superficial and localized, but it somehow props up the conceit of grasping. Recognition, too, is possible only within arbitrarily circumscribed limits. The law of impermanence is persistently undermining it, but still a conceit of recognition is maintained by progressively ignoring the fact of change. Thus, both processes are kept up with the help of signs and symbols. What do signs signify? Things, of course, the less sophisticated would readily answer. As far as common sense goes, signs presumably stand for the things we perceive with their aid. And the things are those forms we see, the sounds we hear, the scents we smell, the flavors we taste, the objects we touch, and the ideas we cognize. The more sophisticated would, however, prefer to be more precise. They would take up the position that behind those changing attributes that we perceive with our imperfect sense apparatus, there lies an unchanging substance, an essence, a noumenon, though analysis fails to reveal any such real essence. A dinganzik, a thing as it is in itself, under the ever-receding layers of qualities and attributes, they would still maintain that, after all, there could not possibly be an attribute without a substance, a quality without a thing that it qualifies. According to the Kālakārāma Sutta, a Tathagata does not conceive of a visible thing as apart from sight, or an audible thing as apart from hearing, or a thing to be sensed as apart from sensation, or a cognizable thing as apart from cognition. Furthermore, as the suttas often make it clear, all perceptions as such are to be regarded as mere signs, sanya, nimitta. Hence, while the worldling says that he perceives things with the help of signs, the Tathagata says that all we perceive are mere signs. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and ideas are, all of them, signs which consciousness pursues. But still, the question may be asked, what do these signs signify? Things, of course, the Tathagata would reply. Things, however, are not those that the worldling has in mind when he seeks an answer to this question. Lust, hatred, and delusion are the things which, according to the teaching of the Tathagata, are signified by all sense perceptions. Lust, friend, is a something. Hatred is a something. Delusion is a something. Rago ko avuso kinchano, doso kinchano, moho kinchano. Mahavedalla Sutta. Lust, friends, is something significative. Hatred is something significative. Delusion is something significative. Rago ko avuso nimitta karano, doso nimitta karano, moho nimitta karano. Mahavedalla Sutta. The pronouncement that all sense perceptions are signs and that the things they signify are lust, hatred, and delusion might appear, at first sight, a not too happy blend of philosophy and ethics. But there are deeper implications involved. It is a fact often overlooked by the metaphysician that the reality attributed to sense data is necessarily connected with their evocative power, that is, their ability to produce effects. The reality of a thing is usually registered in terms of its impact on the experiential side. This is the acid test which an object is required to undergo to prove its existence in the court of reality. in the reference to materiality as manifestative and offering resistance, Sanidassana Sappatighang Rupang from Digha Nikaya's Sangiti Sutta, the validity of this test seems to have been hinted at. Now, the objects of sense which we grasp and recognize as existing out there derive their object status from their impact or evocative power. Their ability to produce effects in the form of sense reaction is generally taken to be the criterion of their reality. Sense objects are therefore signs which have become significant in themselves, owing to our ignorance that their significance depends on the psychological mainsprings of lust, hatred, and delusion. This, in other words, is a result of reasoning from the wrong end, ayoniso manasikara, which leads both the philosopher and the scientist alike into a topsy-turvydom of endless theorizing. Some reflection on your experiences at the magic show might also give you an insight into the truth of the above pronouncement. To the audience, steeped in the bliss of ignorance, the magic show was full of significance, whatever you may say to the contrary. To them, all the articles and artifices employed by the magician, even the hocus-pocus, the abracadabra, and the waving of the magic wand, had a reality in the sense of their evocative power. The craned necks, the gazing eyes, and gaping mouths bore inarticulate testimony to it. The ahs and ohs and whistles also expressed, still inarticulately, the reality of the magic show. And last but not least, that vivid commentary on the magic performance you had occasion to listen to soon after the show was the fully articulate expression of the reality of the bag of wily tricks presented by the shrewd magician. Behind all those gestures, exclamations, and descriptions evoked by the things seen at the magic show, you would not have failed to see the things that really were there, i.e., attachment, aversion, and delusion. Chapter 4. Dependent Arising, Via Media. The Buddha's insight into the backstage workings of the magic show of consciousness has revealed to him the almost unabridgeable gulf that exists between his transcendental level of experience and the worldling's level of sense experience. Whatever, monks, that has been pondered over as truth by the world with its gods and maras, by the progeny consisting of recluses and Brahmins, gods and men, that has been well discerned as untruth by the noble ones, as it really is, with right wisdom. This is one mode of reflection. And whatever, monks, that has been pondered over as untruth by the world with its gods and maras, that has been well discerned as truth by the noble ones, as it really is, with right wisdom. This is the second mode of reflection. From the Sutta Nipāta, the Vāyata Sutta. Monks, that which is of a deluding nature is indeed false, and that is the truth, namely, Nibbāna, which is of a non-deluding nature. For, monk, this is the highest truth, namely, the non-delusive Nibbāna, from Majjhima Nikaya's Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. Despite such declarations by the Buddha of the wide disparity between the worldling's concept of truth and that of the noble ones, we find the Kālakārāma Sutta attributing to the Buddha himself a statement which seems to contradict those declarations. It says that the Tathagata does not hold as true or false whatever is seen, heard, sensed, or clung to, and is esteemed as truth by other folk. How can one resolve this paradox? Once again, you may recollect your unusual experience at the magic show. In that moment of compassion for the frenzied crowd applauding the magician, you had stumbled upon a wider concept of truth. It is the understanding of the principle of relativity behind the concept of truth. The realization that anyone placed in a similar situation would behave as that crowd had a mellowing effect on your sense of judgment. Given the same measure of ignorance as to the secrets of the magician, given the same psychological impulses of greed and hate, anyone would take up such a standpoint as that frenzied crowd, and it is probably the same conviction that caused some embarrassment and hesitation in you in the course of that conversation with your friend. The same magic show was seen in two different perspectives. While the audience saw what the magician performed, you, from your point of vantage, saw how he performed. Thus, there were actually two levels of experience, one arising out of ignorance, the other out of knowledge. Each level carried with it its own conception of bliss, its own reactions and convictions. The former tended towards a tumultuous bliss of ignorance, the latter towards a bliss of appeasement born of understanding. In the Buddhist conception of the knowledge and vision of things as they are, yatha bhuta jnana dassana, both levels of experience find a place. Its content is not any particular theory, or a definite body of knowledge, but a norm which analyzes and lays bare the very structure of experience. This is none other than the law of dependent arising, paticca-samuppada, which in its direct order accounts for the former level of experience, while recognizing at the same time the latter as well, by its formulation in reverse order. This being, this comes to be. With the arising of this, this arises. This not being, this does not come to be. With the cessation of this, this ceases. That is to say, from ignorance as condition arise formations. From formations as condition arises consciousness. From consciousness, name and form. From name and form, the 6 sense spheres. From the 6 sense spheres, contact. From contact, feeling. From feeling, craving. From craving, grasping. From grasping, becoming. From becoming, birth. From birth, as condition, arise decay and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Such is the arising of this entire mass of suffering. From the complete fading away and cessation of that very ignorance, there comes to be the cessation of formations. From the cessation of formations, the cessation of consciousness. From the cessation of consciousness, the cessation of name and form. From the cessation of name and form, the cessation of the 6 sense spheres. From the cessation of the 6 sense spheres, the cessation of contact. From the cessation of contact, the cessation of feeling. From the cessation of feeling, the cessation of craving. From the cessation of craving, the cessation of grasping. From the cessation of grasping, the cessation of becoming. From the cessation of becoming, the cessation of birth. From the cessation of birth, decay and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair cease. Such is the ceasing of this entire mass of suffering. From Majjhima Nikaya's Bahudhātuka Sutta. This law of dependent arising, which embraces the entire gamut of experience, ranging from that of the worldling to the arahants, could be applied even to our problem of the magic show. While the show was going on, if anyone had asked you and your friend, "Is there any magic?" he might have received two contradictory answers, since by then the magic had lost its magic for you. You would have replied, "There is no magic." But your friend had the right to say, "There is." The two answers would be contradictory if understood in an absolute sense, and asserted dogmatically without reference to the question of standpoint. The law of dependent arising resolves the above contradiction by avoiding the two extremes, is and is not, with its wise proviso, "It depends." Given the ignorance of the magician's tricks, formations, i.e., gestures, exclamations, imaginations, come to be. Depending on these formations, the consciousness of the magic show comes to be. Dependent on this consciousness is name and form, pertaining to the world of magic, i.e., feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention, constituting the name aspect and the four primaries of solidity, liquidity, heat, and air, together with the derivative concept of form, making up the form aspect of the world of magic. Depending on this name and form, which comprehends the entire stock and trade of the magician, the six sense spheres of the deluded audience are kept all agog with curiosity. Depending on these sense spheres, there arise appropriate impressions of the marvelous world of magic. Conditioned by such impressions, feelings of exhilaration arise. From these feelings there develops a craving for the perpetuation of that very exhilaration. In response to that craving, there comes to be a grasping after the magic performances. From that grasping, there results a chimerical existence in a world of magic, and the audience, thus spellbound, finds itself born, as it were, into a wonderland. This birth, however, is short-lived. The marvelous magic show, too, like all good things, comes to an end, and that is its decay and death. The above illustration would have made it clear that the existence of the magic can neither be affirmed nor denied absolutely. And what is true of the magic is true of all phenomena comprising the magic show of consciousness. The fact that existence is a relative concept is often overlooked by the worldling. Says the Buddha, "This world, Kaccayana, usually bases its views on two things, on existence and non-existence. Now, he who with right insight sees the arising of the world as it really is, does not hold with the non-existence of the world. And he who with right insight sees the passing away of the world as it really is, does not hold with the existence of the world. The world, for the most part, is given to approaching, grasping, entering into and getting entangled as regards to views. Whoever does not approach, grasp, and take his stand upon that proclivity towards approaching and grasping, that mental standpoint, namely the thought, "This is my soul," he knows that what arises is just suffering, and what ceases is just suffering. Thus he is not in doubt, is not perplexed, and herein he has knowledge that is not dependent on another. Thus far, Kaccayana, he has right view. Everything exists. This is one extreme. Nothing exists. This is the other extreme. Not approaching either of those extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle way. From ignorance as condition, formations come to be. From formations as condition, consciousness comes to be. Such is the arising of this entire mass of suffering. From the complete fading away and cessation of that very ignorance, there comes to be the cessation of formations. From the cessation of formations, the cessation of consciousness. Such is the cessation of this entire mass of suffering. From Samyutta Nikaya's Kaccayana Gutta Sutta. In the context of the law of dependent arising, therefore, the unusual statement of the Kālakārāma Sutta appears to be quite legitimate. To take up, as the worldling does, a standpoint with regard to whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, attained, sought after, and pondered over by the mind, is alien to the spirit behind this comprehensive psychological principle. The Buddha realized that all worldly theories and viewpoints are but individual truths in which people are severely entrenched. Pacceka Satchesu Puthu Nivittha, from Sutta Nipāta's verse 824. Dogmatic theories asserted as absolute truths were regarded by him as a barb on which mankind is hooked and impaled. The worldly concepts of truth and falsehood have a questionable background. They are but the outcome of sense perception, and are beaten out on the anvil of logic in the process of molding this or that theory. There exist no diverse truths which in the world are eternal, apart from perception. Having formulated theories in accordance with logic, they have arrived at the twofold categories called the true and the false. Sutta Nipāta, verse 886. The medley of speculative theories were but partial truths in so far as they originated from individual experience, colored by a good deal of prejudice. The Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipāta, in particular, analyzes the psychology behind the worldling's value judgments as to truth and falsehood. Led by prejudice, he develops a concept of truth out of his viewpoint and tests its validity in debate, where the triple conceit, equal, superior, and inferior, decides the issue. The Buddha points out that if victory in debate is the criterion, truth becomes a mere matter of opinion. Not indeed do I say that this is valid, whereby they mutually called each other fools. They consider their own dogmatic view as the truth, hence do they call the other a fool. Sutta Nipāta, verse 882. The self-opinionatedness on which debates thrive is sometimes the result of an alleged spiritual experience, and then it would come out in a dogmatic tone. I know, I see, it is verily so. Jānāmi, passāmi, tatheva etang. Sutta Nipāta, verse 908. If the opponent too is prompted by such an experience, which has led him to a different conclusion, we get an irreconcilable conflict, a classic instance of which is found in the following words of two Brahmin sophists. Purana Kassapa, O Sire Gautama, claims to be omniscient and all-seeing. He claims to have perfect knowledge and vision, saying, while walking, standing, sleeping, and lying awake, knowledge and vision is ever present to me. And he has declared, I abide knowing and seeing an infinite world with an infinite knowledge. But Gautama, this Nigantanataputta too, claims to be omniscient and all-seeing. He too claims to have perfect knowledge and vision, saying, while walking, standing, sleeping, and lying awake, knowledge and vision is ever present to me. And he has declared, I abide knowing and seeing a finite world with a finite knowledge. Out of these two professors of knowledge, Sire Gautama, who contradict each other, which one has spoken the truth, and which one the falsehood? From the Anguttara Nikaya. The Buddha, however, refuses to act as arbiter in this conflict of viewpoints. Instead, he says, Enough, O Brahmins, let that be. Let be your question. Out of these two professors of knowledge, who contradict each other, which one has spoken the truth, and which one the falsehood? Brahmins, I will preach to you the Dhamma. Listen attentively. And he did preach it, pointing out, in the course of it, that in the terminology of the noble ones, the world is defined as the 5 strands of sense pleasures, and that the end of the world is arahantship itself. One might wonder why the Buddha set aside such a clear-cut question. For one thing, the world, according to the Buddha, had to be redefined, so as to bring out its phenomenal nature. But there is probably another reason. Both worthies involved in this contest for supremacy claimed omniscience. But whereas the former saw an infinite world with an infinite knowledge, the latter saw a finite world with a finite knowledge. Now, the former could, within the bounds of logic, point out a flaw in the latter's position. You are seeing a finite world because your knowledge is limited, i.e., finite. The latter, too, can rejoin with equal justification. But you are seeing an infinite world because your knowledge lacks finality, i.e., infinite. In other words, while the former can regard the latter's knowledge as imperfect on the ground that he cannot see beyond what he claims to be the end of the world, the latter can hold the former's knowledge to be imperfect, saying that the end of the world is beyond its range. This is the kind of circularity in argument often found in speculative views put forward by worldly philosophers. Those who held on to them dogmatically are compared to the blind men who fell out and came to blows when their individual views on what an elephant looks like clashed with each other, as we see in the Udanas. There is, however, one truth knowing which people would not dispute, and that is the very synoptic understanding of the arising, the passing away, the satisfaction, the misery, and the stepping out in regard to that sense experience on which all speculative theories are founded. And that, monks, the Tathagata understands thus. These viewpoints, thus taken up, thus laid hold of, will have such and such consequences, will lead to such and such future states of existence. That the Tathagata understands, and he understands even beyond that. But that understanding he does not grasp, and not grasping, he has, within himself, known the appeasement, Nibbūti. Having known, as they really are, the arising, the passing away, the satisfaction, the misery, and the stepping out in regard to feelings, monks, released without grasping, is the Tathagata. From Digha Nikaya's Brahmajala Sutta. Chapter 5. The Vortical Interplay. Consciousness versus Name and Form. The most outstanding contribution made by the law of dependent arising to the ethical, psychological, and philosophical inquiries of all times is the revelation that there is a vortex hidden beneath the flux of all mental life, perpetually supporting each other and revitalizing each other as they go dotting round and round. Consciousness and name and form make up the samsaric vortex, which is the rallying point of all existence. Just as if, friend, two bundles of reeds were to stand one supporting the other, even so consciousness is dependent on name and form is dependent on consciousness, and the six sense spheres on name and form, contact on the six sense spheres, feeling on contact, craving on feeling, grasping on craving, becoming on grasping, birth on becoming, and decay and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are dependent on birth. Thus is the arising of this entire mass of suffering. But, friend, if one of those two bundles of reeds is drawn out, the other one would fall down, and if the latter is drawn out, the former one will fall down. Even so, friend, with the cessation of name and form, consciousness ceases. With the cessation of consciousness, name and form ceases. With the cessation of name and form, the six sense spheres cease, and so forth. Thus comes to be the cessation of this entire mass of suffering. Samyutta Nikaya's Kālakārāma Sutta. This consciousness turns back from name and form. It does not go beyond. In so far can one be born or grow old, or die, or pass away, or reappear, insofar as this is, to wit, consciousness is dependent on name and form on consciousness, the six sense spheres on name and form, and so forth. Thus comes to be the arising of this entire mass of suffering. Digha Nikaya's Mahapadana Sutta. Insofar only, Ananda, can one be born or grow old, or die, or pass away, or reappear. Insofar only is there any pathway for verbal expression. Insofar only is there any pathway for terminology. Insofar only is there any pathway for designations. Insofar only is the range of wisdom. Insofar only is the round of samsaric life kept going for there to be any designation of the conditions of this existence, that is to say, name and form together with consciousness. Digha Nikaya's Nibbāna Sutta. In this interplay between the two counterparts, consciousness seems to represent actuality, while name and form stands for potentiality. Name and form, when it grows up, deriving vitality from consciousness, gives rise to the infrastructure of the six sense spaces or spheres, which undergo bifurcation as internal, adhyatika, and external, bahira, due to the discriminative function of consciousness. The ensuing processes of contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and becoming portray the springing up into life of those potentialities indicated by name and form. With becoming, or bhava, the vicious circle is complete, and birth is born carrying with it the unpleasant prospects of decay and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. The two links, ignorance and formations, though they are not mentioned in the above three passages, are nevertheless implicit, for the murk of ignorance provides the background for this interplay, while formations directly manifest themselves as the prelude to and the motive force behind the narcissistic interplay. By way of illustration, we may for a moment turn to a game of cricket. Here, consciousness recognizes the presence of two sides as a precondition for the game, while name and form represents the rules, the procedure, and the paraphernalia of the game. The 6 sense spheres which consciousness bifurcates into internal and external are the actual teams selected for the game. With contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and becoming, the cricket match is in full swing. And birth, decay, and death, etc., more or less represent the inexorable vicissitudes of the game. That all pathways for verbal expression, terminology, and designation converge on the vortex of consciousness and name and form is also amply illustrated by this analogy, since the significance of the game depends on one's being conscious of it as a cricket match, with all its implications regarding the personnel, the paraphernalia, and the rules involved. In the wider context of our samsaric existence, the vortical interplay between consciousness and name and form manifests itself as a kind of double bind, jata, a tangle within and a tangle without. Consciousness as the subject always finds itself confronted with name and form as the object, depending on which it develops the concepts of resistance, patigha, and form, rupa sanya. An interplay follows, which is as much comic as it is tragic, in that it involves a petitio principii, an assertion of existence that is equivalent to begging the question. Since the criterion of reality of a thing is, as mentioned above, in Chapter 3, the very impact it has on one's experiential side, the worldling's proneness to cling to name and form as real may be explained with reference to contact, or phassa, which is dependent on it. According to the Buddha, contact is itself a hybrid manifesting traits proper to both groups designated as name and form. The following disquisition on this particular aspect of the problem is likely to be of immense value to the modern psychologist and philosopher. From name and form as condition, contact comes to be. Thus it has been said above. And that, Ñāṇananda, should be understood in this manner too, as to how from name and form as condition contact arises. If, Ñāṇananda, all those modes, characteristics, signs, and exponents by which the name group, Namakaya, is designated were absent, would there be manifest any verbal impression, adivacana sampasso, in the form group, Rupakaye? There would not, Lord. If, Ñāṇananda, all those modes, characteristics, signs, and exponents by which the form group is designated were absent, would there be manifest any resistance impression, patigha sampasso, in the name group? There would not, Lord. And if, Ñāṇananda, all those modes, characteristics, signs, and exponents by which there is a designation of both name group and form group were absent, would there be manifest either any verbal impression or any resistance impression? There would not, Lord. And if, Ñāṇananda, all those modes, characteristics, signs, and exponents by which there comes to be a designation of name and form were absent, would there be manifest any contact? There would not, Lord. Wherefore, Ananda, this itself is the cause, this is the origin, this is the condition for contact, that is to say, name and form. From Digha Nikaya's Mahanidana Sutta. The relevance of signs to this subject of contact is recognized throughout this disquisition. Both the name group and the form group derive their respective designations with the help of modes, characteristics, signs, and exponents. But the most extraordinary fact about them is that their significance depends on each other, a curious reciprocity. A verbal impression in regard to the form group is at all possible because there are those modes, characteristics, etc., proper to the name group. The concept of form is established only when the constituents of the name group, i.e., feeling, perception, intention, contact, attention, have sufficiently experimented with it. Even the so-called four great elements or primaries are themselves subject to this test of validity without which they simply could not stand. Thus, earth, water, fire, and air actually represent the experiences of solidity, liquidity, heat, and motion, in which the name group plays its part. As elements, they are mere abstractions, but they come within the purview of contact as form or matter, rupa, in the guise of verbal impression, which distinguishes between them according to the degree of predominance of their respective qualities. The name group, for its part, owes its validity to the modes, characteristics, etc., proper to the form group. The notion of resistance or impact goes hand in hand with the concept of form or matter, since the actual impact, i.e., impact par excellence, as something that matters, is generally associated with matter. Seeing is believing, but touch is the real thing. Hence, feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention find actual objects in the world of matter. In other words, impact or sense reaction is primarily associated with the signs proper to the form group, patigha sampassa, and only secondarily and metaphorically with those of the name group, adivachana sampassa. This complex character of name and form in relation to contact indicates that Buddhism does not recognize a dichotomy between mind and matter. Instead, it reveals that mentality and materiality are inextricably interwoven into a tangle within and a tangle without. Name and form is seen to play a dual role. In organic combination with consciousness, it is already found in the individual, as implied by the expression saviññānaka kāya, the conscious body. This is the tangle within. As a thing to be measured with this conscious body, name and form is also projected outside into signs, nimitta, in need of interpretation or evaluation. The internal sense spaces and the external sense spaces both partake of name and form. The measuring unit and the thing measured thus presuppose each other, as one may infer from the following sutta passages. Name, friends, is one end, form is the other end. Consciousness is in the middle, and craving is the seamstress, for it is craving that stitches it into the arising of this and that form of existence. From the Anguttara Nikaya. Also from the Anguttara Nikaya, the 6 internal sense spheres are one end, the 6 external sense spheres are the other end. Consciousness is in the middle, and craving is the seamstress. From the Samyutta Nikaya, For the fool, monks, cloaked by ignorance and tied to craving, this body is wrought in this way. There is this body, ayancheva kayo, and name and form, without bahidhacha namarupang, thus this pair. Because of the pair, there is contact and just 6 spheres of sense. Also from the Samyutta Nikaya, how, Lord, does one know? How does one see? So that in regard to both this conscious body, imasmincha saviññānake kaye, and also all external signs, bahidhacha sabbānimittesu, the mind has gone away from notions of I and mind, and from vain conceits, transcending all distinctions. Vidha samatikantang, is at peace and well released. In the context of these two tangles, any rigid dichotomy between mind and matter, such as is envisaged by the worldly philosophers, would appear to be an oversimplification of facts. Any attempt at solving the problem by taking up an exclusive, idealistic, or a realistic attitude is bound to fail. The only solution, in the opinion of the Buddha, lay in cutting off completely this Gordian knot. Wherein are cut off name and form, sense reaction and perceptions of form, leaving no residue at all, therein is cut off the tangle with all. The trends that set in with the vortical interplay between consciousness and name and form continue through the subsequent links of the formula of dependent arising. The 6 sense spheres bifurcate themselves, precipitating a dichotomy of an internal and an external, with its concomitant notions of a here and a there. Contact, in a specific sense, is a sequel to this very dichotomy. It implies a principle of discrimination between two things, and consciousness fulfills this condition. Dependent on the I and forms, friends, there arises I consciousness. A coming together of the three is contact, as we see in Madhupindika Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. The canonical simile of the friction between two sticks illustrates this aspect of contact. With feeling, the split in experience becomes sufficiently palpable as to call forth the notion I am. Where, Ananda, there is no feeling at all, would there be any such notion as I am? There would not, Lord. Digha Nikaya Mahanidana Sutta. The discriminative function of consciousness is seen here in the form of distinguishing 3 feeling tones, and hence sometimes one finds consciousness itself being defined in terms of knowing discriminatively, Jināti, the 3 grades of feeling, pleasant, sukha, unpleasant, dukkha, and neither unpleasant nor pleasant, adukkha masukha. Out of this discrimination there arises craving or thirst for the pleasant, and consequently a reaching out, a grasping for the same. In the process of grasping there is involved a kind of projection of desires, nati, inclination, a bent, whereby the split in experience widens into a definite gap between a subject and an object. Becoming, or existence, is the make-believe attempt to bridge this gap which, however, forever remains unabridged, for the material on which it relies is perpetually crumbling up underneath. Yet it somehow props up the conceit of an ego, the conceit I am, asmimana. From the point of view of the ego, the things clung to, upadana, appear as assets, upadhi, and one takes pride in the very things one depends on. Thus, liabilities are looked upon as positive assets, and an abject slavery becomes a petty mastery. The topsy-turvydom is complete, and the double bind becomes a fait accompli. The ego now finds itself born into a world of likes and dislikes, subject to decay and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Chapter 6. Self, the Point of View. The birth of the ego, or self, as an individual, out of the vortical interplay, is at the same time the birth of a point of view. Personality view, Sakkaya Ditthi, literally the existing body view, in its 20 modes, portrays the desperate attempt of the illusory self to build for itself a foundation by grasping the 5 aggregates, though these are all the time disintegrating. Supposing, monks, there were a river, a mountain torrent, a swift-flowing stream that goes a long way. On both its banks there might be growing kasa grass that overhangs, kusa grass that overhangs, babbaja grass that overhangs, birana grass that overhangs, trees that overhang. A man being swept away by that stream might clutch at the kasa grass, but it might break away, and owing to that he would come to grief. He might clutch at the kusa grass. Similarly, he might clutch at the babbaja grass. Or he might clutch at the trees, but they too might break away, and owing to that he would come to grief. Even so, monks, the uninstructed ordinary man who takes no account of the noble ones is unskilled in the Dhamma of the noble ones, untrained in the Dhamma of the noble ones, taking no account of the good men, unskilled in the Dhamma of the good men, untrained in the Dhamma of the good men, looks upon form as self, or self as having form, or form as being in self, or self as being in form. But his form disintegrates, and owing to that he might come to grief, and so with feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. From Samyutta Nikaya's Nadi Sutta, the river. It is the tragedy of the double bind that, despite their transient nature, the 5 groups sustain the individual's conceit, I am, even as a mirror reflects the image of one who gazes at it. Owing to dependence, friend Ananda, comes the conceit, I am, not without dependence. Depending on what comes the conceit, I am? Depending on form, there comes the conceit, I am, not otherwise. Depending on feeling, perception, formations, similarly with depending on consciousness, there comes the conceit, I am, not otherwise. Just as, friend Ananda, a young woman or man, fond of self-adornment, in gazing at the image of her or his face in a clean, spotless mirror, or in a bowl of clear water, does so depending on something, and not without depending. Even so, friend Ananda, depending on form comes the conceit, I am, not otherwise. Depending on feeling, perception, formations, and similarly, depending on consciousness, comes the conceit, I am, not otherwise. From Samyutta Nikaya's Ananda Sutta. If, in the ignorant worldling's reflection, selfhood appears as something self-evident, it is due to this predicament in which he finds himself. The self-image follows him like a shadow that can neither be outstripped nor escaped. Hence, one can sympathize with the self-created problems of both the eternalist and the nihilist. The eternalist's discomfiture in the face of impermanence is easily understood, but perhaps not so easily the nihilist's. He is dismayed to find the self which he vehemently denied dogging him close behind, when he turns back to introspect. Thus, whether one takes up the viewpoint, I have a soul, or the opposite viewpoint, I do not have a soul, he is bound either way. Monks, a Tathagata understands that thus there are recluses and Brahmins who make known an existing being's annihilation, obliteration, and non-being. Because of fear of the existing body, sakkaya, because of disgust with the existing body, they keep running around, keep circling around that same existing body. Just as a dog tethered by a leash and anchored to a stout pole or post keeps running around, keeps circling around that same pole or post, so too these worldly recluses and Brahmins, because of fear of the existing body, because of disgust with the existing body, keep running around, keep circling around that same existing body. From the Majjhima Nikaya's Pañchattāya Sutta. Since the obsession of self persists, whether one runs towards the shadow or away from it, the solution advanced by the Buddha was the comprehension of the very conditioned nature of the five aggregates of grasping, thereby recognizing the shadow for what it is. He who sees dependent arising sees the Dhamma, and he who sees the Dhamma sees dependent arising. These are but dependently arisen, namely, the five aggregates of grasping, the desire, attachment, involvement, and entanglement. In regard to these five aggregates of grasping is the arising of suffering, and that disciplining, that giving up of desire and lust in these five aggregates of grasping is the cessation of suffering. Majjhima Nikaya, Mahāhatthīpadopama Sutta. By seeing things as they are in the light of wisdom, one comes to understand that the shadow is cast by a narrow point of view in the murk of ignorance. The vision or insight is the result of the arising of the dustless, stainless eye of truth. Virajang Vitamalang Dhammacakkhum, also called the eye of wisdom, Paññā Cakkhu, which reveals to the stream winner the noble norm summed up in the words, whatever is of a nature to arise, all that is of a nature to cease. Yang kinchi samudaya dhammang sabbang nirodha dhammang. From Majjhima Nikaya's Upali Sutta. The disillusionment brought about by this extraordinary vision is so pervasive and transforming that the Buddha compares it to the case of a congenitally blind man, who, as soon as he gains eyesight, becomes disillusioned about a greasy, grimy cloth with which he had been deceived. And even as that man would regard with disfavor the trickster who gave him the cloth, saying that it is a beautiful piece of pure white cloth, the noble disciple, too, on gaining the eye of truth, undergoes a change of attitude towards his own mind. Even so, Magandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma, pointing out to you that state of health, that Nibbāna, and if you, on your part, were to understand that state of health and see that Nibbāna, simultaneous with that arising of the I in you, whatever desire and lust you had in the 5 aggregates of grasping will be abandoned. And furthermore, it would occur to you, for a long time indeed have I been cheated, deceived, and enticed by this mind. For in grasping, it was merely form that I had been grasping. It was merely feeling that I had been grasping. It was merely perception that I had been grasping. It was merely formations that I had been grasping. It was merely consciousness that I had been grasping. And from my grasping there arises becoming, conditioned by becoming birth. And conditioned by birth there arise decay and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair. It is thus that there comes to be the arising of this entire mass of suffering. From Majjhima Nikāya, Māgandiya Sutta. Your own disenchantment on seeing through the wily tricks of the magician might give an indication of the nature of the transformation in outlook that results from the arising of the eye of truth. The noble disciple, too, begins to discover the magician's surprises well in advance so as to be able to anticipate the surprises. The magic loses its magic for him. Now that he sees plainly where exactly the secret of the magic lies, that is, in his own psychological mainsprings of lust, hatred, and delusion. He realizes that, apart from them, there is no reality in the articles and artifices involved in the magic show of consciousness, and is now in a position to appreciate the Buddha's statement in the Kālakārāma Sutta. Thus, monks, a Tathagata does not conceive of a visible thing as apart from sight. He does not conceive of an unseen. He does not conceive of a thing worth seeing. He does not conceive about a seer, and so forth. The penetration into the conditioned nature of consciousness is tantamount to a storming of the citadel of the illusory self. With it, the personality view, Sakkaya Ditthi, is abandoned, and the assets, Upadhi, on which the self depended, i.e., the 5 aggregates of grasping, begin to get liquidated. Consciousness ceases to appear as a substantial core of living experience. Instead, one now sees it with radical reflection, yoniso manasikara, as a dependently arisen phenomenon which is always specific, even as fire is. Just as, monks, dependent on whatever condition a fire burns, it comes to be reckoned in terms of that condition. That is to say, a fire that burns dependent on logs is reckoned as a log fire. A fire that burns dependent on faggots is reckoned as a faggot fire. A fire that burns dependent on grass is reckoned as a grass fire. A fire that burns dependent on cow dung is reckoned as a cow dung fire. A fire that burns dependent on chaff is reckoned as a chaff fire. A fire that burns dependent on rubbish is reckoned as a rubbish fire. Even so, monks, consciousness is reckoned by the condition dependent on which it arises. A consciousness arising dependent on eye and forms is reckoned as an eye consciousness. A consciousness arising dependent on ear and sounds is reckoned as an ear consciousness. A consciousness arising dependent on nose and smells is reckoned as a nose consciousness. A consciousness arising dependent on tongue and flavors is reckoned as a tongue consciousness. A consciousness arising dependent on body and tangibles is reckoned as a body consciousness. A consciousness arising dependent on mind and ideas is reckoned as a mind consciousness. from the Majjhima Nikāya, Mahatanha Sankhya Sutta. The five aggregates, which, from the point of view of self, one earlier took for granted as the given, now appear as dependently arisen, made up and composite. Their process of accumulation, upachaya, is also seen to be something like a trickling through the sieve of consciousness. But even the sieve of consciousness performs its function only when the proper conditions are there. If the I in oneself, friends, were intact, but no external forms entered the range of vision, and there were no appropriate bringing into focus, samannaharo, then there would be no manifestation of the appropriate class of consciousness. If the I in itself were intact, and external forms also entered the range of vision, but there were no appropriate focusing, there would be no manifestation of the appropriate class of consciousness. But it is when the I in oneself is intact, external forms also enter the range of vision, and the appropriate focusing too is there, that there is a manifestation of the appropriate class of consciousness. And any form in one who is in such a state is included in the form aggregate of grasping. Any feeling in him is included in the feeling aggregate of grasping. Any perception in him is included in the perception aggregate of grasping. Any formations in him are included in the formations aggregate of grasping. And any consciousness in him is included in the consciousness aggregate of grasping. And he understands. This, it seems, is how there comes to be inclusion, gathering and amassing into these five aggregates of grasping. From the Majjhima Nikāya, Mahāhatthīpadopama Sutta. Chapter 7. The Transcendental Path. A flash of insight might give one a glimpse of the subtle backstage maneuvers behind the illusory magic show of consciousness. But in every case it might not be powerful enough to destroy all cankers or influxes, asava, which seek to influence every moment of one's living experience. The influxes, which are generally reckoned to be threefold, i.e., those of sensuality, kāmasava, becoming, bhavasava, and ignorance, avijjasava, are the cankers born of our cumulative experience in samsara. They include all corrupting tendencies, inclinations, and obsessions that constitute the ruts and grooves of our mental terrain. Perhaps a deeper analysis of their influence is to be seen in the 7 latencies, anusaya, those of attachment, aversion, views, doubts, conceits, attachment to becoming, and ignorance. If latencies are to be compared to subterranean currents at subconscious level, influxes might be described as streams manifest at the conscious level. In the ethical terminology of early Buddhism, the potency and sweeping influence of these influxes is also indicated by comparing them to floods, ogha. In the context of latencies, influxes and floods, a complete reorientation of sense perception often becomes an arduous task requiring diligent practice. The Noble Eightfold Path, in its transcendental aspect, provides the noble disciple with the necessary scheme of mental training, whereby the process of accumulation of the 5 aggregates of grasping may be effectively checked, thus nullifying the influence of the aforesaid corrupting forces. Knowing and seeing the I, monks, as it really is, knowing and seeing forms as they really are, knowing and seeing I consciousness as it really is, knowing and seeing eye contact as it really is, and also knowing and seeing whatever feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither unpleasant nor pleasant, that arises dependent on eye contact as it really is, one gets not attached to the eye, gets not attached to forms, gets not attached to eye consciousness, gets not attached to eye contact, and gets not attached even to that feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither unpleasant nor pleasant, that arises dependent on eye contact. And for him, as he abides unattached, unfettered, uninfatuated, contemplating the peril in eye, etc., the 5 aggregates of grasping that would have arisen undergo effacement, apachayang gacchanti. That craving which makes for re-becoming, which is accompanied by delight and lust, finding delight here and there, that too is abandoned in him. His bodily disturbances cease. His mental disturbances cease. His bodily afflictions cease. His mental afflictions cease. His bodily distresses cease. His mental distresses cease. And he experiences physical and mental happiness. Whatever view such a one has, that becomes for him right view. Whatever intention he has, that becomes for him right intention. Whatever effort he puts forth, that becomes for him right effort. Whatever mindfulness he has, that becomes for him right mindfulness. And whatever concentration he has, that becomes for him right concentration. But his bodily actions and his verbal actions and his livelihood have already been purified earlier. So this noble eightfold path comes to be perfected in him by development. From the Majjhima Nikaya's Mahasalayatanika Sutta. The 5 aggregates of grasping, which are said to be compounded or concocted, sankata, are but accumulated sense experience, fermented by ignorance. Due to egotistic clinging in the form of conceiving, manjana, sense data become impregnated with this dynamic ferment, and proliferation, papancha, follows. It is in view of this state of affairs that particular emphasis is laid on the necessity of viewing sense data with detachment. The Buddha's advice to Bahya clearly indicates that this training has as much a philosophical as an ethical background. Then Bahya, thus must you train yourself. In the seen there will be just the seen. In the heard, just the heard. In the sensed, just the sensed. In the cognized, just the cognized. That is how, Bahya, you must train yourself. Now, when Bahya, in the seen, there will be to you just the seen, in the heard, just the heard, in the sensed, just the sensed, in the cognized, just the cognized, then, Bahya, you will not be reckoned by it. And when Bahya, you will not be reckoned by it, you will not be in it. And when Bahya, you will not be in it, then Bahya, you will not be here, nor there, nor midway in between. This itself is the end of suffering. From the Udana. Chapter 8. Suchness and the Such-like One. The principle underlying the 12-linked formula of dependent arising is a law of nature that is universally applicable, whether one is dealing with the animate realm or the inanimate. It presents a dynamic view of all phenomena as they arise, depending on causes, only to cease when these are removed. This being, this comes to be. With the arising of this, this arises. This not being, this does not come to be. With the cessation of this, this ceases. The law is so integral that any two consecutive links of the formula would amply illustrate it. Hence, we find the Buddha sometimes drawing a distinction between dependent arising, paticcasamuppada, as such, and dependently arisen phenomena, paticcasamuppanna Dhamma, well knowing the popular tendency to lose sight of the essentials by getting involved in details. Monks, I will teach you dependent arising and dependently arisen things. And what, monks, is dependent arising? From birth as condition, decay and death comes to be. Whether there be an arising of Tathagatas or whether there be no such arising, this nature of things just stands. This causal status, this causal orderliness, the relatedness of this to that. Concerning that, the Tathagata is fully enlightened, that he fully understands. Fully enlightened, fully understanding, he declares it, teaches it, reveals it, sets it forth, manifests, explains, makes it plain, saying, Behold! From birth as condition, decay and death comes to be. From becoming as condition, birth comes to be, etc. From ignorance as condition, formations come to be, etc. Thus, monks, that suchness therein, the invariability, the not otherwiseness, the relatedness of this to that, this, monks, is called dependent arising. And what, monks, are things dependently arisen? Decay and death is impermanent, compounded, dependently arisen, is of a nature to wither away, pass away, fade away, and cease. So too is birth, becoming, grasping, craving, feeling, contact, 6 sense spheres, name and form, consciousness, formations, ignorance. These also are impermanent, compounded, dependently arisen, are of a nature to wither away, pass away, fade away, and cease. These, monks, are called things dependently arisen. From the Samyutta Nikaya. Suchness, or tathata, invariability, avitatata, not otherwiseness, ananyatata, and relatedness of this to that, idappacayata, i.e. specific conditionality, are highly significant terms indicating the degree of importance attached by the Buddha to this law of dependent arising. The first 3 terms affirm the validity of the law. Tatha, it may be noted, is a word meaning thus, or such, a rather unassuming type of expression, carrying with it some nuances of detachment as well. As a correlate of yatha, in whatever way, tatha says little on its own, but for that very reason, tathata, suchness or thusness, becomes a fitting epithet for the principle of dependent arising. Here is a concept of truth, shorn of all sectarian prejudice and pretension, a universal norm, true for all times, irrespective of the arising of Tathagatas, to reveal and proclaim it, is indeed one that could rightly be called a suchness. The relatedness of this to that, idappacayata, which implies specific conditionality, is a term that brings out the essentially dependent and relative character of the phenomena through which the law finds expression. It explains, in particular, the significance of the pairwise formulation, showing that in each pair, given the first member, the second follows of necessity. Phenomena have a tendency to manifest themselves as a flux, one conditioned phenomena leading to another. It is this dynamic aspect of the law that finds figurative expression in the following simile. The ocean, monks, when it swells, makes the great rivers swell. The great rivers, when they swell, make their tributaries swell. These, when they swell, make the mountain tarns swell. Even so, monks, swelling ignorance makes formations swell. Swelling formations make consciousness swell. Swelling birth makes decay and death swell. The ocean, monks, when it ebbs, makes the great rivers ebb. These make the tributaries ebb. These make the mountain lakes ebb. These make the mountain torrents ebb. Even so, monks, ebbing ignorance makes formations ebb. Ebbing formations make consciousness ebb, and so forth, down to ebbing birth makes decay and death ebb, from the Samyutta Nikaya. Thus, the law holds good for both kinds of flux, that of water and that of psychological states. The process of tide and ebb is a tendency not only of water, but of the samsaric individual as well. The recognition of this process as it is marks a significant advance on the trends of animistic thought which, from prehistoric times, sought to explain phenomena in terms of essence, soul, or self. It is all the more significant for its corollary that the entire process could be made to cease progressively by applying the proper means. Negatively put, the spiritual endeavor to end all suffering is a process of starving the conditions of their respective nutriments, ahara, as indicated by the latter half of the formula of dependent arising. However, there are enough instances in the Pali Canon to show that it is quite legitimate to conceive this receding process positively too, as a progress in terms of wholesome mental states. Just as when monks on some hilltop, when rain is falling in thick drops, that water, coursing according to the slope, fills the hillside clefts and chasms and gullies. These being filled up, fill the tarns. These being filled up, fill the lakes. These being filled up, fill the little rivers. These being filled up, fill the great rivers. And the great rivers being filled up, fill the sea, the ocean. Even so, monks, there is causal association of formations with ignorance, of consciousness with formations, of name and form with consciousness, of the sixfold sense sphere with name and form, of contact with the sixfold sense sphere, of feeling with contact, of craving with feeling, of grasping with craving, of becoming with grasping, of birth with becoming, of suffering with birth, of faith with suffering, of joy with faith, of rapture with joy, of serenity with rapture, of happiness with serenity, of concentration with happiness, of the knowledge and vision of things as they really are with concentration, of turning away with the knowledge and vision of the things as they really are, of dispassion, with turning away, of deliverance with dispassion, of knowledge about extinction of influxes with deliverance. From the Samyutta Nikaya's Upanisa Sutta. Instead of a tide and ebb, we find in the above sutta a leading onward towards fullness or perfection. And it is this aspect of the Dhamma that finds expression in the epithet Opanayiko. The famous simile of the relay chariots in the Ratthavinita Sutta from Majjhima Nikaya depicts this leading onward in a figurative way. A less figurative, but an equally effective expression of this fact is found in the Buddha's words. Thus, monks, mere phenomena flow into other phenomena. Mere phenomena fill up or perfect other phenomena in the process of passing from the not beyond to the beyond. From the Anguttara Nikaya. There are some far-reaching conclusions flowing from a consideration of the law of dependent arising as a suchness and a specific conditionality. As already mentioned in Chapter 4, this law has a wholesome effect on one's outlook in enabling one to avoid entanglement in speculative theories current in the world. In addition to it, the understanding of the flux within and without fosters an attitude of enlightened equanimity. One begins to look upon phenomena as impermanent, anicca, and void of essence, sunya, of any selfhood. What one imagined to be permanent now appears to be impermanent because one sees its arising and passing away. But a more astounding revelation comes in the form of the conviction that it is the very conceiving or egotistic imagining, mannyana, which gives rise to those phenomena or things, Dhamma. To conceive is to conceive as a thing, but that thing is, as it were, stillborn, for it cannot survive in a world where separation, nānabhāvo, privation, vinabhāvo, and otherwiseness, anyathabhāvo, i.e. transformation, are the inexorable law. Whatever thing they conceive of, ipso facto it turns otherwise, and that becomes false for him, the puerile, delusive thing that it is. Selfhood, which tries to sit pretty on that which is liable to disintegrate, Prologue Dhammaṃ, is itself subject to the inexorable law of impermanence. In the face of this predicament, one craves, grasps, and becomes yet another thing, which too yields to the same law of nature. The world attached to becoming is becoming otherwise. Subject to becoming, it yet delights in becoming. What it delights in is a source of fear, and what it fears is suffering. The process of becoming is thus shown to be perpetually going on within the mind of the samsaric individual, who identifies himself with sense data under the influence of the proliferating tendencies towards craving, conceits, and views. This identification is implied by the term tammayata, literally of thatness, and one who resorts to it is called tammayo, one who is made of that, or is of that stuff. Since the perpetual process of becoming in the psychological realm is necessarily followed by birth, decay and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in every specific instance of short-lived identification, an insight into the law of dependent arising provides one with the key to the entire gamut of samsaric experience. One comes to understand the cycle of samsaric life by discovering its epicycle in the very structure of living experience. He is now convinced of the fact that it is craving that plays the villain in the drama of samsaric existence, bringing about re-becoming, pono bhavika, by delighting now here, now there, tatra tatra bhinandini. Problems of existence, of life and death, which one had hitherto tried in vain to solve in the wider context of samsaric lives, spread out in time and space, now find a solution in the timeless akaliko epicycle of samsara, revolving within the mind. Hence, all problems converge on the all-important issue of abandoning that craving which makes for re-becoming. By revealing the antecedents of craving, the law of dependent arising points to a technique whereby this tendency deeply ingrained in the ruts of our samsaric habits could be ferreted out of its sockets. Ignorance has to be replaced by knowledge. In other words, the tendency to attend to the dependently arisen phenomena by imagining things in them has to be overcome by training the mind to attend to the law of dependent arising instead. It might be recalled that each of the 12 links of the formula has been described as impermanent, compounded, dependently arisen, of a nature to wither away, pass away, fade away, and cease. The via media of training the mind to attend to the nature of things rather than to the things themselves may be called a rare type of psychotherapy introduced by the Buddha. It is a way of making the conditioned phenomena fade away and cease by penetrating into their cause. Thus, insight into the noble norm ariyo nyayo of dependent arising implies a knowledge of the cause, hetu, as well as of the things causally arisen, hetupabhava dhamma, hetusamuppanna dhamma. As the insight into the principle, this being, this comes to be, with the arising of this arises, this not being, this does not come to be, with the cessation of this ceases, goes deeper and deeper into the fabric of the 12-linked formula. A decoloration or a fading away ensues, with which one realizes the destruction of the very conditions, paccaya, forming the warp and woof of the formula in its direct and reverse order. The truth of impermanence is thus tested in the crucible of one's own experience, a panoramic view of the world arising and passing away as seen through one's own 6 sense spheres. The reference in the Nibbāna to the Buddha's reflection on dependent arising in direct order, anulomang, in reverse order, patilomang, and in both direct and reverse order, anuloma patilomang, soon after his enlightenment, has to be understood in this sense. This penetrative insight into the arising and cessation of phenomena dispels all doubts as to the speculative problems of absolute existence and non-existence, of unity and plurality, etc., and the mind is brought to rest in the middle, though paradoxically it now rests on nothing. Thingness has completely faded away, so much so that craving finds no thing to grasp at. Instead of an attempt at identification, dhammyata, impelled by craving, a detached contemplation of the norm of suchness, tathata, sets in. With this emancipation of the mind, one's attitude towards the world with all its vicissitudes becomes one of such likeness, tadita, of aloofness, atammayata, and he deserves to be called the such one, or the such like one, tadi, or tadiso, that ardent one who touched the destruction of birth by overcoming Mara, by vanquishing the ender, that wise sage, the such-like one, the knower of the world, is unattached, atammayo, in regard to all phenomena. The attitude of the such-like one reflects an extraordinary blend of qualities, ranging from firmness and steadfastness to adaptability and resilience. To the worldling, this appears as a paradox, because he always associates the concept of firmness with some standpoint. Not to take up a standpoint is to vacillate, and hence he finds it difficult to conceive of a firmness apart from it. The Buddha, however, discovered that the truth is just the contrary. To the one attached, literally, one who is supported, there is wavering or dislodgement. To the unattached one, there is no wavering. Wavering not being, there is calm. Calm being, there is no bending, i.e., inclination. Bending not being, there is no coming and going. Coming and going not being, there is no death and birth. There being no death and birth, there is neither a here nor a there, nor any position between the two. This itself is the end of suffering. Seen in the Udana, Majjhima Nikāya, and Samyutta Nikāya. The one unattached wavers not, but the one attached, who clings, does not transcend samsara, which is of the nature of thisness and otherwiseness. Ittha bhavanya bhavang. Knowing this peril, this great danger, in supports nissayesu, let the monk fare along mindfully, resting on nothing, clinging to nothing. From the Sutta Nibbāna, verses 752 to 753, Dvayata Nupassana Sutta. As the river simile quoted above, seen in chapter 6, illustrates, the worldling has the tendency to clutch at the things in the form of phenomena when he finds his self being swept away by the swift-flowing stream of nature. With cravings, conceits, and views, he tries to cling to and rest on the fleeting phenomena, only to be foiled in his attempts. Every attempt to salvage the self from the flux is followed by a definite series of psychological reactions. From the very moment of his identifying himself with the thing of his choice, i.e. mannyana, there sets in unsteadiness or wavering in the face of possible dislodgement. Bending or inclination is that blind reaching out into the unknown future, prompted by craving or thirst. The guide in becoming, bhavaneti, the concepts of coming and going are relative to the standpoint already taken in the process of identification. A relationship having been thus established between one's present identity and a possible future state, there follows the corollary, death and birth, with its note of finality. With it, relative distinctions of a here, a there, and a midway between also set in. The entire process, whether it be understood in the context of the epicycle of samsara, traceable to every moment of living experience, or in the context of the larger cycle of samsara, rolling in time and space, is a perpetual alternation between a thisness and an otherwiseness. Ittabhavanyata bhavang. Now, the such-like one who sees the danger in resorting to supports which only give way underneath, grasps at nothing and clings to nothing. He has given up all standpoints, as we've seen in the Kālakārāma Sutta, and in doing so, has discovered a basis for firmness which never betrays. His is an unshakable deliverance of the mind, akuppa ceto vimutti. Since he is free from attachment, anurodha, and repugnance, virodha, in the face of the worldly vicissitudes of gain and loss, honor and dishonor, praise and blame, happiness and unhappiness. In the case of a monk who is fully emancipated in mind, friends, though many forms cognizable through the eye may come within the range of the eye, they never obsess his mind. Unalloyed is his mind, steady and become imperturbable, and he sees its passing away. Though many sounds, smells, flavors, tangibles, and ideas, they never obsess his mind. Unalloyed is his mind, steady and become imperturbable, and he sees its passing away, as seen in the Anguttara Nikaya. The Buddha's declaration in the Kālakārāma Sutta, thus, monks, the Tathagata, being such-like in regard to all phenomena seen, heard, sensed, and cognized, is such, is an allusion to this uninfluenced mind of the emancipated one. In spite of the fact that firmness is usually associated with rigidity, in a certain sense, the such-like one may be said to possess an adaptability and resilience, for which his epithet can easily find a place among its nuances. To revert to the river simile again, the such-like one has escaped from the swift-flowing stream by letting go of both the self and the things seized as supports for the self. This might sound like a paradox, but all what he has done is to attune himself to reality by getting rid of the illusion of self. As we saw above, it was this perverted notion that made him cling to the frail grasses on the river bank in a bid to save his self. The conceit of existence or becoming was the result of this clinging, upadana paccaya bhavo. And all conceits of birth, decay, and death were but relative to it. By penetrating into the truths of impermanence, suffering, and not self, the such-like one has adapted himself to the worldly vicissitudes, which are but manifestations of the above conceits. These vicissitudes do not touch him or affect him, because he has already cut off all craving, the guide in becoming. Uchhinnabhavanetiko, from the Digha Nikaya's Brahmajala Sutta. Steadied whereon the tides of conceit, manyusava, no more occur in him, and when the tides of conceit no more occur, he is called a hermit, stilled, muni santo. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? M is a conceit, manyitang. I am this is a conceit. I shall be is a conceit. I shall not be is a conceit. I shall be possessed of form is a conceit. I shall be formless is a conceit. I shall be percipient is a conceit. I shall be non-percipient is a conceit. I shall be neither percipient nor non-percipient is a conceit. Conceit is a disease. Conceit is a cancer. Conceit is a dart. It is with the surmounting of all conceits that he is called a hermit stilled. The hermit who is stilled neither is born, nor ages, nor dies. He is unshaken, na kuppati, and free from longing. He has none of that whereby he might be born. Not being born, how shall he age? Not aging, how shall he die? Not dying, how shall he be shaken? Being unshaken, what shall he long for? So it was with reference to this that it was said, steadied whereon the tides of conceit no more occur in him. And when the tides of conceit occur no more, he is called a hermit, stilled. From the Majjhima Nikaya's Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. Chapter 9. Essence of Concepts. Concepts play a prominent role in the magic show of consciousness. Their influence is so pervasive that even the thinker in his quest for truth can hardly afford to dispense with them totally, however inadequate he finds them to be. In all transactions in mental life, concepts come in useful as current coin. The seeker after truth might doubt their providence, but still he has to recognize their utility value, willy-nilly. As we saw above, the Buddha discovered a middle path in regard to the problem of concepts when he distinguished between the law of dependent arising and the phenomena dependently arisen. Concepts, as dependently arisen phenomena, are illustrations of the law, and hence their utility value was recognized. Yet the Buddha pointed out that it is the insight into the law itself that is essential, and that concepts, when once they have fully illustrated the law, must themselves fade away in that radiance of wisdom, Panya Pabbha, having fulfilled their purpose. This recognition of a higher purpose is an alchemy which transmutes the concept into a precursor of deliverance. It marks a remarkable advance on the extreme attitudes of dogmatism and cynicism or agnosticism, and explains why the term Dhamma, thing, phenomenon, mind-object, concept, doctrine, law, etc., is such a generic term in Buddhism. Without clinging to the concept or trying to wriggle out of it, the Buddha penetrated deep into its character and revealed those strains in it that could be effectively utilized in one's quest for truth and freedom. Once he instructed the monks as to how they should reply to a series of questions that could be raised by wandering ascetics of other sects concerning the origin, behavior, and purpose of all things. When thus questioned, monks, you may reply to those wandering ascetics as follows. Rooted in desire or interest, friends are all things. Born of attention are all things. Arising from contact are all things. Converging on feelings are all things. Headed by concentration are all things. Dominated by mindfulness are all things. Surmountable by wisdom are all things. Yielding deliverance as essence are all things. Merging in the deathless are all things. Terminating in Nibbāna are all things. When thus questioned, monks, you may reply in this way to those wandering ascetics of other sects. From the Anguttara Nikāya. Here the Buddha uses the generic term Dhamma, which, for all practical purposes, may be rendered by things. But that the reference is to thoughts and concepts is clearly revealed by the following catechism employed by the Venerable Sariputta to test the Venerable Samiddhi's acquaintance with the above disquisition of the Buddha. With what as object, Samiddhi, do thoughts and concepts, sankappa vitakka, arise in a man? With name and form as object, Venerable Sir. But wherein, Samiddhi, do they assume diversity? In the elements, Venerable Sir. But whence, Samiddhi, do they arise? They arise from contact, Venerable Sir. But on what, Samidhi, do they converge? They converge on feelings, Venerable Sir. But what, Samidhi, is at their head? They are headed by concentration, Venerable Sir. But what is it, Samidhi, that dominates them? They are dominated by mindfulness, Venerable Sir. But what, Samidhi, is their point of transcendence? They are transcended by wisdom, Venerable Sir. But what is it, Samidhi, that forms their essence? They have a deliverance as their essence, Venerable Sir. But in what, Samidhi, do they get merged? They get merged in the deathless, Venerable Sir. From the Anguttara Nikaya. From the Buddha's explanation regarding the origin of things, their phenomenal character could easily be inferred. As stated in the pair of opening stanzas in the Dhammapada, all things have mind as their forerunner. Mind is their chief, and they are mind-made. The worldling with his object-oriented world-view might find it difficult to appreciate the Buddha's words when he says that things are rooted in desire or interest, chanda, that they are born of attention, manasikara, and that they arise from contact, phassa. By projecting his desires, the worldling has so alienated himself that he is prone to believe word and meaning to be eternally united in nature, even like the divine pair. Radical reflection, yoniso manasikara, as to the matrix of the concept, would however reveal that meaning, as far as its meaning is concerned, is not very far from the psychological mainsprings whence arise all desires, interests, needs, purposes, and designs. See above in Chapter 3. It is but the community of interests prompted by a measure of homo sapient conceit that gives the conceit its stamp of authority after infusing into it a particular set of meanings hammered out on the anvil of logic, takka pariyahata. Once it comes out as a finished product, one is apt to forget its compound and synthetic character, which it is the task of radical reflection to rediscover. In the matrix of the concept, interest isolates the thing. The beam of attention magnifies it, while contact defines and circumscribes it. To the extent concepts become significant, they may be said to converge on feelings. The element of concentration that guides them and the power of mindfulness that dominates them are redeeming features of concepts from the point of view of deliverance. The actual point of intersection, however, is wisdom. Here, concepts are transcended. When penetrative wisdom, which sees the rise and fall, udayatāgamini paññā, intuits into the reverse and obverse of these current coins. They thus expend themselves, yielding deliverance as their essence, and get merged in the deathless, reaching consummation in Nibbāna. In rallying the concepts for the higher purpose of developing wisdom, whereby concepts themselves are transcended, the Buddha has adopted a via media of a rare type. Concepts which make up the topsy-turvydom of samsara are pressed into the service in order to develop the spiritual faculties, but always with adequate safeguards. This fact is well illustrated by the Satipatthana Sutta, where each subsection introducing a particular type of contemplation is followed by a paragraph, thematic in form, which neutralizes any errors of judgment that can easily arise from a too literal interpretation. For instance, the subsection on the contemplation of the four postures is set out as follows. And further, O bhikkhus, when he is going, a monk understands, I am going. When he is standing, he understands, I am standing. When he is sitting, he understands, I am sitting. When he is lying down, he understands, I am lying down. Or however his body is disposed, he understands accordingly. In this way, he abides contemplating the body as a body in himself, or he abides contemplating the body as a body externally, or he abides contemplating the body as a body in himself and externally, or else he abides contemplating the arising nature in the body, or he abides contemplating the dissolving nature in the body, or he abides contemplating the arising and dissolving nature in the body, or else the mindfulness that there is a body is established in him only to the extent necessary for just knowledge and remembrance, and he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. Digha Nikaya and Majjhima Nikaya. The dogmatist and the cynic, both of whom might go astray by interpreting too literally the words I am going, I am standing, I am sitting, and I am lying down, should do well to note the significance of the practical hints given. Any undue emphasis on the I am is likely to give rise to an obsession with the idea of a self or an ego, and the cynic, for his part, is only too quick to notice here a contradiction with the teachings on anatta, not self. But the mindfulness relating to body is not meant to be taken as an obsession with the body. Firstly, the provision for its application to others as well as to oneself is a way of universalizing the principle involved in the practice, thereby riddling the mind of any tendency to get preoccupied with the ego. Secondly, the contemplation of the arising nature, the dissolving nature, and the arising and dissolving nature of the body tends to keep away any notions of substantiality that may be associated with it, and furthermore, prepares the mind for the final penetration of the concept of the body through wisdom. Lastly, the proviso that the awareness there is a body should be regarded merely as a means to an end, that its purpose is the sharpening of the spiritual faculties of mindfulness and wisdom, is a warning to those who miss the wood for trees. A monk who keeps to the true spirit of the practice, therefore, is one who abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. The constant awareness of its dependently arisen nature acts as a catalyst wherever the concept is utilized to subserve higher ends. The fact that it is only a reckoning, sankha, in the world is never lost sight of, and its composite nature is often analytically demonstrated. To this detached outlook, it mattered little whether the concept is that of a house or that of a body. Just as, friends, space equipped with timber and creepers and grass and clay comes to be reckoned as a house, even so, a space equipped with bones and sinews and flesh and skin comes to be reckoned as a form, i.e., a body. From Majjhima Nikaya's Mahāhatthipatopama Sutta. Not only in regard to the contemplation of body, kāyanupassana, but also in the case of the other three contemplations, i.e., those of feeling, vedana-anupassana, mind, citta-anupassana, and mind objects, dhamma-anupassana. one is enjoined to observe the same practical hints. When in the case of these three, it is stated that such mindfulness as there are feelings, there is a mind, or there are mind objects, is established in him only to the extent necessary for just knowledge and remembrance, it becomes evident that the Buddha had steered clear of the ontologist, who is apt to treat such categories as absolute. According to the phenomenalistic approach of the Buddha, not only the different types of feelings and mental states, but the entire range of doctrinal categories summed up under the last section, i.e., contemplation of mind objects, has nothing in it that is worth clinging to. All of them can be subsumed under the term concept, and that is to recognize their conditioned nature, the nature of arising and ceasing. Friends, when there is I and there is form, and there is I consciousness, it is possible that he will point out a designation of contact, phassa paññatti. When there is a designation of contact, it is possible that he will point out a designation of feeling. When there is a designation of feeling, it is possible that he will point out a designation of perception. When there is a designation of perception, it is possible that he will point out a designation of thought, vitakka paññatti. When there is a designation of thought, it is possible that he will point out a designation of obsession, due to reckonings born of prolific perception. Papancha sanya sankha samuda charana paññatti. When there is ear, sound, ear consciousness. When there is nose, odor, nose consciousness. When there is tongue, flavor, tongue consciousness. When there is body, tangible, body consciousness. When there is mind, mind object, mind consciousness, and so forth. A designation of obsession due to reckonings born of prolific perception. When, friends, there is no I, and there is no form, and there is no I consciousness, it is impossible that he will point out a designation of contact. When there is no designation of contact, it is impossible that he will point out a designation of feeling. When there is no designation of feeling, it is impossible that he will point out a designation of perception. When there is no designation of perception, it is impossible that he will point out a designation of thought. When there is no designation of thought, it is impossible that he will point out a designation of obsession due to reckonings born of prolific perception. When there is no ear, no sound, no ear consciousness, when there is no mind, and there is no mind object, and there is no mind consciousness, and so forth, it is impossible that he will point out a designation of obsession due to reckonings born of prolific perception. From the Majjhima Nikaya's Madhupindika Sutta. It would indeed appear strange to us that in Buddhist psychology, even contact and feeling, with which we are so intimate, are treated as designations. We might feel that this is an intrusion of the designation into the jealously guarded recesses of the psyche. Yet this is not the case, for in the very act of apperception, contacts and feelings are reckoned, evaluated, defined, and designated on the basis of one's latencies, i.e., the aggregates. Thus, there is hardly any justification for regarding them as the given, though we are accustomed to take them for granted. In other words, what we are wont to treat as the given turns out to be synthetic and composite, sankata. The concepts on which the four foundations of mindfulness, cattaro satipatthana, are established, have nothing essential in them in any ontological sense. The entire structure is a mere network utilized for the development of mindfulness and wisdom. It is a net meant for a seeing through and hence, when penetrative wisdom is fully developed, consciousness soars untrammeled through the 4 square meshes of the net. Monks, I will teach you the arising and going down of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Listen attentively to it. What, monks, is the arising of the body? With the arising of nutriment is the arising of the body. With the cessation of nutriment is the cessation of the body. With the arising of contact is the arising of feeling. With the cessation of contact is the cessation of feeling. With the arising of name and form is the arising of the mind. With the cessation of name and form is the cessation of the mind. With the arising of attention is the arising of mind objects. With the cessation of attention is the cessation of mind objects. From the Samyutta Nikaya's Samudāyo Sutta. The Catechism quoted at the beginning of this chapter reveals that the object dependent on which thoughts and concepts arise is name and form. This comprehensive term, it may be recalled, is the partner of consciousness in the Vortical Interplay. See Chapter 5. It is noteworthy that name and form is often associated with the idea of entering into or getting entangled, while delusion is expressly called a net. Behold this world with all its gods, fancying a self where naught exists. Entering into name and form, it builds the conceit, this is the truth. From the Sutta Nibbānas, verse 756, Dvayata-nupassana Sutta. Let one put wrath away, conceit abandon, and get well beyond all fetters as well, that one by name and form untrammeled and possessionless, no pains befall. From Dhammapadas, verse 221, Kodhavagga, anger. No fire like lust is there, no grip so tight as hate, no net like crass delusion, no river like craving flows. From Dhammapadas, verse 251, Malavagga, impurities. In the Vangisa Sutta of the Sutta Nipāta, it is said that the Venerable Nigrodhakappa cut off the net of Machu, an epithet of Mara, the net so treacherously spread by the deceitful one. Achhida machuno jalang, tatang maya vino dalhang. Sutta Nipāta, verse 357. The commentary identifies the net with craving in Sutta Nipāta's verse 355. He cut off craving for this name and form, so said the Lord. Kanha's stream which had lain so long. It is more likely, however, that the net of Machu here referred to is name and form. Delusion is compared to a net in the above verse of the Dhammapada, and moreover, the image usually associated with craving, which is always dynamic, is either a river, nadi, or a stream, sota, as in the 2 verses quoted above. Owing to craving, consciousness finds itself enmeshed in name and form, its object, ārammana. All speculative views, based on sense experience, however logical they may appear, are but cobwebs on the net. Hence, when the dogmatic philosopher clings to the theory he has spun out from his limited viewpoint and asserts, I know, I see, 'tis verily so. See above Kālakārāma Sutta. All that he sees, according to the Buddha, is the net of name and form. Some arrive at purity through dogmatic views, saying, I know, I see, it is verily so. Even if he had seen, what difference does it make to him? Having bypassed the truth, it is by another, alien, means that they proclaim purity. A seeing man will see name and form, and having seen, he will know those alone. Verily, let him see much or less, yet the experts do not speak of purity thereby. From Sutta Nipāta's verses 908 to 909, Mahavyuha Sutta. All objects of the six senses lure consciousness into the net of name and form, craving being the decoy. Worldly consciousness always finds itself glued to this or that object, which tends to becloud its vision of reality. These objects, forming the meshes of the net, have a simulating nature about them, which makes it difficult for one to thrust them out of the whole scheme of conscious living. They cannot be wished away, for they are there so long as the senses are there. Greed, hatred, and delusion, which those objects as signs signify, are not abandoned verbally or physically, but by wisdom. What, monks, are those things that are abandoned, neither by body nor by word, but by continually seeing with wisdom? Greed, hatred, delusion, anger, etc. From Anguttara Nikāya. It is therefore when consciousness is weaned away from the tendency to get enmeshed in the net of name and form that the essence of the concept, deliverance, is attained. Then one will be gazing not at the net but through it, not at the things but at the nature of the things. And it will be a gaze that is neither attentive nor non-attentive, neither conscious nor non-conscious, neither fixed nor not fixed, a gaze that knows no horizon. Chapter 10. Non-Manifestative Consciousness. Consciousness, which is non-manifestative, endless, lustrous on all sides. Here it is that earth and water, fire and air no footing find. Here again are long and short, fine and coarse, pleasant, unpleasant, and name and form are cut off without exception. When consciousness comes to cease, all these are held in check herein. From Digha Nikaya's Kevadha Sutta. The illusory nature attributed to consciousness by the Buddha is, in a sense, a recognition of its reflexive character. Like a mirror, it reflects the five aggregates, the fifth of which is consciousness itself. This, indeed, is a magical illusion. Consciousness, when it reflects on itself, reflects as self-consciousness, and in fact, all consciousness in the normal sense is self-consciousness. There is a curious duplicity involved, a veritable paradox. When one identifies oneself as reflected in the mirror of consciousness, saying, I am, or here I am, one has already taken for granted a duality, though unwittingly. Already a gap is created as a split in experience, and consequently there sets in the possibility of measuring as conceit, Māna. Stated otherwise, it is a dependence, or rather an interdependence. Just as much as one gazing at a mirror becomes aware not only of his form, but also of the feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention pertaining thereto, in becoming self-conscious too, one is aware of a similar set of objects, which are collectively called name and form. As in any magic show, here too, an important part is played by form, rupa. That inertia, peculiar to form, provides the basis for the most elementary judgment involved in the life of all organisms, namely, the dichotomy of existence and non-existence. Seeing destruction and existence in material objects, a person arrives at a resolution in the world. Rupesu disva vibhavang bhavancha vinichhayang kurute jantulo ke. Sutta Nibbāna, verse 867. Kālakārāma Sutta. Material objects appear to persist for some period before they get destroyed, and in them the law of impermanence has found a camouflage. It is possible that the perverted notion, vipallasa, of permanence is radically traceable to a misjudgment in regard to material objects, whereby the ever-present process of change was overlooked, and the two extreme views of absolute existence and absolute non-existence came to be asserted. But this is just one strand in the tangle of samsaric life forming the double bind, as we saw in Chapter 5. There is another. It is the notion of sense reaction or resistance, patigha, which represents the polar opposite of the inertia associated with the perception of form, rupa sanya. It manifests itself as feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention, comprising name in name and form. The actual situation called sense contact arises when both name and form collaborate. Depending on name and form arise contacts. Namancha rupancha paticca phassa. From Sutta Nibbāna, verse 872. Hence, when form ceases to exist, contacts cease to function, as it says in the same verse, Rupe vibhute napusanti phassa. The problem then boils down to this. To one, in doubt in which manner does form cease to exist? Katang sametassa vibhoti rupang. From the following verse, within Sutta Nibbāna, verse number 873. The reply to this question comes in the form of a paradox. Neither is he percipient of normal perception, nor is he one of abnormal perception. He is not non-percipient, nor has he put an end to perception. It is to one who is thus constituted that form ceases to function. For reckonings characterized by conceptual prolificity have perception as their source. Here we have an extraordinary level of perception, which has fully extricated itself from the obsession of form, so basic to the structure of perception. The negative formulation indicates that the transcendence is not by temporary or permanent suppression of perception. Rather, it suggests a case of seeing through perception, so that if anyone had inquired whether he was conscious of any sense data, or whether he was unconscious or non-conscious, or completely without consciousness, at the time he was in this level of perception, he would have replied in the negative. Once, when the Buddha was staying in the chaff house at Ātuma, there was a torrential downpour of rain, accompanied by lightning and thunder, in the course of which 2 farmers and 4 bulls at the chaff house were struck down by lightning. A big crowd of people had gathered at the place of accident, and the Buddha, coming out of the chaff house, was pacing up and down by its gate. A man from that crowd came up to him and saluted him, and then this dialogue followed. "Why, friend, has this big crowd gathered here?" "Just now, Lord, when it was raining in torrents, with flashes of lightning and peals of thunder, 2 farmers, brothers, and 4 bulls were killed. That is why this big crowd has gathered." "But where were you, Lord?" "I was here itself, friend." Why, Lord, didn't you see what happened? No, friend, I did not see. But Lord, didn't you hear the sound? No, friend, I did not hear the sound. Why, Lord, were you asleep at the time? No, friend, I was not sleeping. Why, Lord, were you conscious at the moment? Yes, friend. So then, Lord, you being conscious, sanyi samano, and awake, neither saw nor heard anything, though it was raining in torrents, with flashes of lightning and peals of thunder. That is so, friend. From the Digha Nikayas, Nibbāna Sutta. This dialogue might not appear so strange to you, since you have had a foretaste of it at the magic show. Nevertheless, that state of concentration which partakes of such a paradoxical character did appear strange not only to a man from the crowd, but even to monks and nuns who were not yet arahants. Time and again we find them inquiring from the Buddha or from the senior disciples about the possibility and nature of such a concentration. Once the Venerable Ñāṇananda put the following question to the Buddha. Could there be, Lord, for a monk such an attainment of concentration, wherein he will not be conscious of earth in earth? Na patavisming patavisanye, nor of water in water, nor of fire in fire, nor of air in air, nor will he be conscious of the sphere of infinity of space, in the sphere of infinities of space, nor of the sphere of infinity of consciousness, in the sphere of infinity of consciousness, nor of the sphere of nothingness, in the sphere of nothingness, nor of the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, in the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, nor will he be conscious of this world in this world, nor of a world beyond in a world beyond, and yet he will be conscious? The Buddha replies that there could be such a state of concentration for a monk, and on being questioned as to how it is possible, he explains, Herein, Ñāṇananda, a monk is thus conscious, evaṃ sanyi. This is peace, this is excellent, namely, the calming down of all formations, relinquishment of all assets or substrata, upadhi, destruction of craving, detachment, cessation, Nibbāna. It is thus, Ñāṇananda, that there could be for a monk such an attainment of concentration. From the Anguttara Nikāya. From this explanation it appears that perception is not completely rescinded here. Only it has now discovered some kind of quasi-object worth attending to, instead of the usual objects such as earth, water, fire, and air. It is none other than the cessation aspect of dependent arising, in the contemplation of which all formations that go to the compound things are completely calmed down. Consequently, all assets get liquidated. Craving loses its sanction and supreme detachment, as the transcendental experience of the cessation of all existence is thereby realized even here and now. That this is a dynamic vision in which all perceptions and concepts are deprived of their object status is revealed by the following explanation given by the Venerable Sariputta when the Venerable Ñāṇananda put the selfsame question to him. Cessation of becoming is Nibbāna. Cessation of becoming is Nibbāna. Thus, friend, one perception arises in me, another perception fades out in me. Just as, friend, when a faggot fire is blazing, one flame arises and another flame fades out. Even so, friend, one perception arises in me. Cessation of becoming is Nibbāna, and another perception fades out in me. Cessation of becoming is Nibbāna. At that time, friend, I was conscious of this. Cessation of becoming is Nibbāna, from the Anguttara Nikaya as well. Here then is a consciousness of the very cessation of consciousness. Though well nigh a contradiction, it is yet a possibility because of the reflexive character of consciousness. Instead of a consciousness of objects, here we have a consciousness which is without an object or support. Whereas under normal circumstances, consciousness mirrors or manifests something. In this concentration it is non-manifestative. It is as though, in a moment of detached contemplation, one has become aware of a raging fire, where formerly one had noticed only stockpiles of firewood. Form, monks, is on fire. Feeling is on fire. Perception is on fire. Formations are on fire. Consciousness is on fire. Thus, seeing, monks, the instructed noble disciple gets disgusted with form, gets disgusted with feeling, gets disgusted with perception, gets disgusted with formations, gets disgusted with consciousness. Being disgusted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion he is released, and in release there comes the knowledge of release. Extinct is birth, lived out is the holy life, done is the task, and he understands. There is nothing beyond this for the conditions of this existence. From the Samyutta Nikaya's Aditta Sutta, that there is a radical change of attitude resulting in a shift of focus from fuel to fire, or from nutriment to its significance, is well illustrated by the Buddha's discourse to the Venerable Sandha on this subject. There he draws a distinction between the musing of an unruly horse and that of a thoroughbred. An unruly horse, tethered to the trough, does not think, "What step of training will the trainer make me undergo today? How best should I respond to him?" Instead, it goes on musing, "Fodder, fodder." An excellent thoroughbred horse, on the other hand, does not muse, "Fodder, fodder," even though it is tethered to the trough, but goes on musing, "What step of training will the trainer make me undergo today? How best should I respond to him?" Such a horse considers it as a debt, a bond, a misfortune, or bad luck to get whipped. With this simile, the Buddha illustrates the difference between the worldly musing of an untrained man and the transcendental musing of a good thoroughbred of a man. The former, gone into solitude, does not understand as it really is the stepping out from sensuous lust, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry and doubt, and dwells with a mind obsessed with those 5 hindrances, brooding on them. And he muses on earth, water, fire, air, sphere of infinity of space, sphere of infinity of consciousness, sphere of nothingness, sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. He muses dependent on this world, on the world beyond, on whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, attained, sought after, and traversed by the mind, dependent on all that he muses. But a good thoroughbred of a man, gone into solitude, does not dwell obsessed with the hindrances, brooding on them, as he understands the stepping out from them. And he does not muse dependent on earth, water, fire, air, and other objects above mentioned. Nevertheless, it is said, he does muse, Jayati Chipana. This musing, which is not dependent on any object, is said to be so strange that even gods and Brahmas from afar bow down, saying, "We worship thee, thou thoroughbred of men. We worship thee, most excellent of men." For what it is whereon depending thou art musing, that we cannot comprehend. From the Anguttara Nikaya. Objects play no part in this perception, precisely for the reason that the subject is missing. This experience of the cessation of existence, bhava nirodho, which is none other than Nibbāna here and now, is the outcome of the eradication of the conceit I am. It is the element of egotistic measuring or reckoning present in a perceptual situation that results in full-fledged concepts. What, monks, is the result of perception? Monks, I say that perception has usage as its result. As one perceives, so one expresses it, saying, I was of such a perception, i.e., thus conscious. Reckonings characterized by conceptual proliferation have perception as their source. When name and form, which stands in the relation of object ārāmmana to concepts, is transcended, the latter lose their point of reference, their foothold. Hence, earth, water, fire, and air, together, with such relative distinctions as long and short, subtle and gross, pleasant and unpleasant, find no footing in that non-manifestative consciousness. The fecundity of concepts, which manifests itself in normal perception, as the essence or substance, is thereby destroyed. Consciousness, which is non-manifestative, infinite, and lustrous all around, it does not partake of the solidity of earth, the cohesiveness of water, the hotness of fire, the movement of air, the creaturehood of creatures, the devahood of devas, the pajapatihood of pajapati, the brahmahood of brahma, the radiance of the radiant ones, the luster of the lustrous ones, the vehapalahood of the vehapala brahmas, the overlordship of the overlord, and the allness of the all. From Majjhima Nikaya's Brahmani Mantanika Sutta. Having lost their fecundity in the emancipated mind, concepts do not lend themselves to proliferation, papancha. The emancipated one, who has realized the voidness of concepts through higher knowledge, no longer entertains egotistic imaginings based on them. And the Tathagata too, monks, who is an Arahant, fully enlightened, understands earth as earth through higher knowledge, knowing earth as earth through higher knowledge. He does not conceive earth to be earth. He does not conceive on the earth. He does not conceive from the earth. He does not conceive earth is mine. He does not delight in earth. What is the reason for this? I say it is because it has been well comprehended by him. From the Majjhima Nikaya's Mula Pariyaya Sutta. As the Kālakārāma Sutta puts it, the Tathagata does not conceive of a visible thing as apart from sight, and entertains no conceits of a thing worth seeing or of a seer. This is the result of the conviction gained through his transcendental experience of the extinction of all phenomena in that non-manifestative consciousness. When consciousness is not arrested by any object at the point of focus, it penetrates through the net of name and form out into an infinitude, and viewpoints give place to an all-encompassing vision. In this respect, it is described as lustrous all round, sabbadānaṃ, and the luster is wisdom itself. The illumination brings about a fading away, viraga, of all objects which earlier appeared to be significant, due to the bewitching gleam of sense consciousness. Consequently, this experience is sometimes referred to as the cessation of the 6 sense spheres, salayatana nirodha. Therefore, monks, that sphere should be known wherein the eye ceases, and the perception of form fades away. The ear ceases, and the perception of sounds fade away. The nose ceases, and the perception of smells fade away. The tongue ceases, and the perception of tastes fade away. The body ceases, and the perception of tangibles fades away. The mind ceases, and the perception of ideas fades away. That sphere should be known. That sphere should be known. From Samyutta Nikaya's Kālakārāma Sutta. The monks who referred this brief utterance of the Buddha to the Venerable Ñāṇananda for explanation were told that it concerns the cessation of the 6 sense spheres, just as much as the cessation of consciousness is called non-manifestative consciousness in so far as it is yet a level of experience. The cessation of the 6 sense spheres is also described as a sphere, ayatana. There is, monks, that sphere wherein there is neither earth, nor water, nor fire, nor air, wherein is neither the sphere of infinity of space, nor that of infinity of consciousness, nor that of nothingness, nor that of neither perception nor non-perception, wherein there is neither this world nor a world beyond, nor moon and sun. There, monks, I declare, is no coming, no going, no stopping, no passing away, and no arising. It is not established, appatitang. It continues not, appavatang. It has no object, anarammanang. This indeed is the end of suffering, the Udana. The world of sense experience, where laws of relativity dominate, is thus transcended in a sphere which is not somewhere in outer space, but within this very fathom-long body. Together with those sense objects which appear to be concrete, such as earth, water, fire, air, sun, and moon, such abstract notions associated with them as coming, going, stopping, passing away, and arising also fade away. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and ideas, all of which are signs, have now lost their significance. They no longer signify things, for lust, hatred, and delusion are extinct in the emancipated one. All that his signless deliverance of the mind, animitta ceto vimutti, now signifies is the very absence of lust, hatred, and delusion in him, which, in effect, is the knowledge of Nibbāna, Aññā, the cessation of all birth and becoming, and of all formations that breed manifold suffering. Monks, there is a not born, a not become, a not made, a not compounded. Monks, if that not born, not become, not made, not compounded were not, there would be no stepping out here from what is born, become, made, compounded. But since, monks, there is a not born, a not become, a not made, a not compounded, therefore there is a stepping out from what is born, become, made, and compounded. The Udana. The world infettered to delusion feigns a promising mean. The fool to his assets bound sees only darkness around. It looks as though it would last, but to him who sees, there's naught. The Udana. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, ideas, all what they deem desirable, charming, pleasing things, of which they claim it is, as far as their claim extends, the world with its gods is agreed that these are pleasant things, and wherein they sure cease. That's unpleasant indeed, say they. As bliss, the noble ones have seen the curb on selfhood bias. Behold, in contrast is their vision with that of the entire world. What others spoke of in terms of bliss, that as woe the saints declared. What others spoke of in terms of woe, that as bliss the saints have known. Behold, a norm so hard to grasp, baffled herein are ignorant ones. Murk it is to those enveloped, as darkness unto the undiscerning, but to the good wide open it is, as light is unto those discerning. So near, and yet they know not, fools unskilled in the norm. The above epithets of Nibbāna are therefore psychological and not metaphysical in their import. Where there is no putting together, there is no falling apart. Hence, Nibbāna is also called apalokitaṃ, the non-disintegrating. It is unfortunate that many scholars, both Eastern and Western, have interpreted metaphysically the two passages from the Udana quoted here, bringing out conclusions which are hardly in keeping with the teachings on anatta. The widespread tendency is to see in these two passages a reference to some mysterious, nondescript realm in a different dimension of existence, though the Buddha was positive that all existence is subject to the law of impermanence. By those who are given to lust for becoming, by those who are swept by the current of becoming, by those who have slipped into Mara's realm, not easily comprehended is this norm. Who else but the noble ones deserve to waken fully onto that state, by knowing which, being influx-free, tranquil Nibbāna they attain? From Sutta Nipatas, verses 759 to 765, Dvayatānupassana Sutta. Chapter 11. Peace is Bliss in Nibbāna, an Epilogue. Lead me from untruth to truth. Lead me from darkness to light. Lead me from death to deathlessness. Such was the yearning of the Indian mind. It was a yearning in sympathy with the highest aspirations of mankind. The Kālakārāma Sutta, when understood in the light of the salient teachings of the Buddha, would go a long way in showing us how this yearning could be fulfilled. There is, however, a radical departure in Buddhism in regard to the approach to these problems of truth, light, and deathlessness. Truth, which is the key to the riddle of existence, was hitherto believed to be in the custody of a Godhead. Light, which dispels the gloom of the spirit, could be propitiated. It was thought only in a mystic absorption with that Godhead. Immortality, which solves the problem of death, the inexorable tragedy of all living beings, was supposed to have been secured only in a different dimension of existence, where the immortal gods, Amara, eternally revel in their ambrosia, Amrita. In contradistinction to this popular psychology, the naivete of which the metaphysicians tried in vain to conceal, comes the message of the Buddha. He discovered truth where one least expected to find it. Existence and its cessation, the problem and its solution, were found interwoven in a tangle at the very vortex of all existence, if only one could disentangle it. And this he successfully did, and also revealed to humanity the way of setting about it. Truth, according to him, is in no one's custody, and has no esotericism or mysticism associated with it. It is a question of seeing things as they are, and once the necessary clarity of vision is developed, one could see it in all its lucidity and limpidity in the very structure of all phenomena. Dhamma, as truth, invites one to come and see, ehipassiko. Just as if there were a lake in a mountain recess, clear, limpid, and unturbid, so that a man with good eyes standing there on the bank saw shells, gravel, and pebbles, and also shoals of fish swimming about and resting, who might think, there is this lake, clear, limpid, and unturbid, and there are those shells, gravel, and pebbles, and also shoals of fish swimming about and resting. So too, monks, a monk understands as it really is, this is suffering. He understands as it really is, this is the arising of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. And this is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. He understands as they really are. These are influxes. He understands as it really is. This is the arising of influxes. This is the cessation of influxes. This is the path leading to the cessation of influxes. And the mind of him who knows and sees thus is released from the influxes of sense desires, from the influxes of becoming, from the influxes of ignorance. In release, there arises the knowledge of release, and he understands. Extinct is birth. Lived out is the holy life. Done is the task. There is nothing beyond this for the conditions of this existence. From the Majjhima Nikaya's Mahāassapura Sutta. The darkness that beclouds the clarity of vision in our mental life was traced by the Buddha to the delusion of a self. The delusion as the point of view created a background of ignorance in order to perpetuate itself. The mind became committed and limited due to ignorance and craving. Here is a case of possession, giving rise to a pre-possession, an acquisition resulting in a privation. The knowledge amassed by the six sense spheres, functioning within the narrow confines staked out for them by the ego, was thus found to be tantamount to an ignorance. There was the inevitable dichotomy of an internal and an external sense space, and consciousness was cramped up between a here and a there. The problem of illumination, therefore, was not dependent on any union or absorption with a Godhead, which is equivalent to merging one darkness, self, in another darkness, capital Self. Only the self-created, artificial confines had to be broken down with a penetrative flash of wisdom, in order that consciousness may develop its capacity to be infinite and all-lustrous. And the discovery that this capacity is already there in the mind, if only one could develop it, comes as an unexpected revelation to mankind. This mind, monks, is luminous, but it is defiled by extraneous defilements, that the uninstructed ordinary man does not understand as it is. Therefore, there is no mind development for the uninstructed ordinary man, I declare. This mind, monks, is luminous, and it is released from extraneous defilements, that the instructed noble disciple understands as it is. Therefore, there is mind development for the instructed noble disciple, I declare. The Buddha realized that birth and death are inseparable corollaries of the conceit of existence. The law of impermanence, which holds sway even in heavenly realms, would militate against any notion of immortal existence. Besides, the quest for immortal existence was only a symptom of the deep-seated fear of death. If only this obsessional fear could be removed, the problem would be no more. Hence, he advanced a novel type of solution to the problem of life and death. He pointed out that although immortal existence is impossible, one could still experience ambrosial deathlessness, and that even here and now. One had to recognize fully the truths of impermanence, suffering, and not self, whereby existence, on which both birth and death depended, is made to cease. The remedy, it would appear, was somewhat on homeopathic lines, though the dose of impermanence to be administered was by no means minute. The approach was so radical that it even entailed the strange paradox that if the reflection on death is systematically well developed, it would get merged in the deathless, amato gadha. Thus, instead of attempting to stifle death artificially by heavenly ambrosia, the Buddha saw to it that death died a natural death in a sphere of transcendental experience of a deathless, attainable in this very mortal world. That destruction of craving, that detachment, that excellent ambrosial deathlessness which the Sakya sage attained being concentrated, there is nothing comparable to that Dhamma. From Sutta Nibbānas, verse 225, Ratana Sutta. The Buddha's approach, it may be repeated, was so radical that it even dispensed with the supplicating attitude behind the words, "Lead me in the yearning cited above." The Dhamma, as the suchness of phenomena, had the inherent capacity to lead on, opanayiko, and hence no divine grace was found to be necessary. It was only a question of entering the stream of Dhamma, Dhamma soto, which runs counter, patisotagami, to the broader samsaric stream of suffering. The realization here and now, sanditthiko, of the spiritual goal, as represented by truth, light, and deathlessness, does not put the emancipated one totally out of alignment with the world, preventing all mediation. In the principle of dependent arising, he has discovered a safeguard against the conflicts that normally arise when there is an unbridgeable gap between levels of experience. The Kālakārāma Sutta, in particular, portrays how cautious the Buddha was in this concern. Nor is it the case that the realization of a transcendental sphere of experience has put his sense faculties out of alignment. Save for the fact that lust, hatred, and delusion no longer affect their functioning. His synoptic understanding of the five aspects in regard to the six sense spheres enables him to live in the world, though he is not of the world, and it is in this respect that the Nibbāna element with residual clinging, saupadisesa Nibbāna dhātu, becomes significant. And what, monks, is the Nibbāna element with residual clinging? Herein, monks, a monk is an arahant whose influxes are extinct, who has lived out the holy life, accomplished the task, laid down the burden, reached his goal, whose fetters of existence are fully extinct, and who is freed through right knowledge. His five sense faculties still remain, which being undestroyed, he partakes of the pleasant and the unpleasant, and experiences the pleasurable and the painful. The extinction of lust, hatred, and delusion in him, this, monks, is called the Nibbāna element with residual clinging. From the Itivuttaka. Even though the emancipated one apparently comes back to the world of sense experience, the bliss of Nibbāna is yet the same inward peace, ajhatta santi, or appeasement, upasama. Like other aspects of transcendence, this too is not always easily appreciated by the world. That there could be a form of bliss in the absence of desires is something that is equally paradoxical as the ones cited before. And yet, radical reflection might reveal that, as a matter of fact, it is not the desire that is blissful, but its appeasement. Desire, being a form of stress and tension, like hunger and thirst, is in itself a malady, and it is only its appeasement that even in our normal life brings happiness. The tragedy, however, is that the appeasement bought at the price of the desired object is short-lived. For even like a fire, desire flares up again with renewed force. It is owing to this fact that the Buddha did not recognize it as a real appeasement. On the contrary, he saw in it a vain attempt to extinguish a fire by adding more and more fuel to it. The principle underlying the attempt to appease desires, nevertheless, reveals that desires in themselves are not blissful. Now, if appeasement of desires is what is really blissful, desirelessness as the appeasement of all desires would be the supreme bliss, and this, in fact, is what Nibbāna is. Unfortunately, the most widely known epithet for the summum bonum of Buddhism has acquired in course of time a stigma of being too negative in its connotations. Despite obvious canonical evidence, there is a hesitation to recognize the fact that it essentially signifies an extinguishing, if not extinction, the dismal word. There is something traumatic in one's response to the so-called negative definitions, and hence we usually leave the word Nibbāna untranslated, though its more sociable companions fare better in this respect. This tendency becomes more marked when, for instance, Nibbāna is clearly defined in the suttas as the destruction of lust, hatred, and delusion, and then even the commentary is rather apologetic. If, as mentioned above, desirelessness is itself the supreme bliss, perhaps Nibbāna could easily vindicate its rights to be considered a positive happiness, since the totality of existence is illustrated by the simile of the fire. Nibbāna, as its extinction, is also the experience of appeasement or tranquility. It is therefore associated with the idea of becoming cool. Having become hungerless, extinguished, and grown cool even here and now, I proclaim parinibbāna, perfect extinguishing, which is free from clinging or fuel. From the Anguttara Nikāya. This perfect extinguishing or appeasement, which involves no fuel at all, is one that could be enjoyed free of charge. Those who, with a firm mind, exert themselves well in the dispensation of Gautama, they, being free from desire, have reached their goal, and having plunged into the deathless, amatang vigaya, are enjoying the appeasement, nibbūti, obtained free of charge, muddha. From Sutta Nipātas, verse 228, Ratana Sutta. With the appeasement of formations, sankhārupāsama, The magic show of consciousness ends for the emancipated one, well before it ends as scheduled, at death. The magic has lost its magic for him, and never again will he waste his time and money on such empty shows. Before he makes his exit, he has gained an unshakable conviction, aññā, of the emptiness of the show, now that he has seen the wily tricks of the magician. Instead of the bliss of ignorance enjoyed by the frenzied worldly audience, he has enjoyed gratis the tranquil bliss of emancipation, the supreme noble appeasement. Paramo Ariyo Upasamo, from Majjhima Nikaya's Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. There is no bliss higher than peace, Nati Santi Parang Sukhang, from Dhammapada's verse 202. Aneka jati sangsarang sandha visang anibbisang gahakarakang gavesanto dukkha jati punapunang gahakaraka dithosi puna gehang nakahasi sabbate phasukha bhagga gahakutang visankhatang visankhara gatang chittang tanhanang kaya ajjaga. Through many a sansaric birth I ran, seeking the house builder in vain. Pain it is to be born again and again. O house builder, thou art seen. Thou shalt build no house again. Shattered lie all thy rafters. Thy rooftop is torn asunder. Mind attained, fermentless state. Reached is craving's end. From Dhammapada's verses 153 to 104. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.